As we have announced last time, tonight we are dealing with the issue of our racist banks, and at the same time, we are asking the question, what went wrong with our banking system and how can that be corrected? On our panel for participation tonight is Regge Nkosi, who is the Executive Director for Research, Head First Source Money, and researching in money and macroeconomics. We also have with us Emerald van Zyl, an attorney and a veteran anti-racist banks crusader. I have again with me, as in the previous Twitter Spaces conversations, Tsepo Khadima as my co-moderator. And I want to move immediately for us to open the discussion, because the issues around racist banking is truly critical for all of us. Many of us have been affected by the conduct of our racist banking system. Black South Africans, and especially African South Africans, have been the victims of racial profiling, of not being able to get financing for their businesses and also for their private business enterprises and requests that they have directed to our banking system. A shocking statistic that I have seen over the last couple of days is that 19 out of every 20 applications for small and medium-sized businesses for financing by our banks, especially when it comes from Black and African South Africans, are turned down. At the same time, we've heard what Tito Mboweni recently said when he complained strongly that in our current banking system, the special program for assistance during the COVID-19 emergency funding failed because of the attitude of our banks. But shockingly, we heard that the South African Reserve Bank insisted that our banking system had to apply and continue to apply the strict and racially defined and discriminatory regulations with regards to the allocation of those funds. Once again, and one cannot help but have a cynical chuckle, President Ramaphosa said that he was shocked by these developments. Well, whether the president is shocked or not, our government has allowed this racist banking system to continue. I've asked Regge Nkosi to give us an input on our banking system and exactly what the problems are that we are faced with. I do this on the basis of an excellent article that he has written about our banking system, which appeared in the Independent online. I want to take two short paragraphs as quotes from that article to just give us the context in which we face this. Our banks have said that they are private institutions, that they've got the right to act as private institutions and the freedom to decide with whom they want to do business and who are their clients. Therefore, also that they've got the right to close any person's bank account or any company's bank account if they find that they do not like that particular person or that particular company. Not that that company or person does anything wrong or acts criminally. It is simply an individual decision as a private business that the banks can take. And Regge wrote, among other things, the following. He says, our banks, and I quote him, are institutions. They are not firms and are creators and allocators of money and credit. They provide money supply and not financial intermediaries as is commonly and erroneously perceived. They are thus charged with two social utility functions of money and credit creation and the proper functioning of the monetary system of which they are an integral part. They underpin the health of our whole economy. And then the second quote I want to share with us to keep into consideration for our discussion: as institutions central to monetary systems, banks must be and are organically tied to the state through the license given to them by the state to perform delegated state duties for its citizens, including financial inclusion, payment systems, and related monetary policy functions. As a result, they enjoy a unique privilege of implicit and explicit government and citizen guarantees of their solvency, end quote. I'm going to hand over to Regge Nkosi now to give us a short introduction in terms of the concerns that he raised in that article about how our banking system functions, and also to give us an indication of the kind of banking system that we as a developing nation with a huge gap between the rich and poor should have, and also what the role of a state bank should be. After that, we will go over to Emerald van Zyl. He will talk more from the personal experience of himself and some of his clients about the incredible negative impact that the discriminatory actions and behavior of the banks have on many of our citizens. I will then also ask my co-moderator, Tshepo Gadima, to participate and give his input, and Tshepo, as always, will co-moderate this whole session. Regge, thank you so much for being with us, and I'm handing over to you now. Thank you. Regge, can you hear me? Can you please come in? I have unmuted you. Regge, I'm not sure if you can hear me. I don't get any sound feedback from you. Can you hear me, please? Can you come in? I don't seem to be able to get any response from Regge. Can I ask Tshepo Gadima to come in? I've also included Tshepo now as co-host. And also, I'm waiting to see if Emerald van Zyl has joined us. Hello?
Thank you, Carl.
Tshepo?
I think, yeah, let's try and see.
We seem to have a little bit of a problem in terms of responsiveness. Regge is online, but he is not responding. So perhaps, Tshepo, you can come in. I don't know. I haven't seen Emerald van Zyl online. Do you know if he is online?
Yes, we're trying to get Emerald to connect. I think he will connect shortly. And maybe with Regge, let me just see if we can be able to call him directly on his line. Just give me a minute.
Okay. Regge, you spoke earlier. Can you indicate if you can hear me? Because you are registered here on my screen as a co-host. If you're muted, can you please unmute yourself? Reg, can you hear me? Tsepo, I think you should come in and give us your introduction that you would have given later while we battle to get Reg and Emerald online. Reg, do you want to come in, or Tsepo, can you come in?
No, Carl. Well, whilst we are trying to connect with them, maybe let's proceed. The best way we can. Look, the question is that a topic of this nature, and I think the setting that you outlined in terms of the article penned by Regge Nkosi really hits the nub of it. We actually have got two issues that we have to deal with. I anticipate that Reg would speak at length also in terms of the type of monetary policy, which is bizarre and absurd in the least. I mean, in the extreme, that the South African Reserve Bank, seems to want to, was hell bent on implementing. But why that monetary policy posture of the South African Reserve Bank is not only archaic but inappropriate for a developing nation such as ours, and also on. And I hope that he does. If he doesn't, I also can speak about it at length. The issue of the need why the South African Reserve Bank must be nationalized, not because the African National Congress at its last national conference took a resolution for the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, but why this is actually appropriate, but also a clear and urgent and present need for our economy to be able to function. The nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank, particularly taking into account that it derives its existence from our constitution of the republic, and more so in terms of the constitutional rights that money and money creation as well as credit are at the heart of that. So that's why South Africans ought to be interested in a topic of this nature. And also, as we mentioned, that Emerald van Zyl is a veteran lawyer who has been an ardent campaigner on the unlawful and also illegal conduct of the banking institutions in South Africa, whereby if we were to take a poll, I'm sure even on the people that are in this Twitter space today, we wouldn't be surprised. It would be expected as to how many of them would have fallen victim to the unconstitutional, unlawful, and abusive conduct of the banks, which are effectively a mafiocracy, and on the need why something has to be done. Now, Emerald van Zyl, as a lawyer, has for a number of years now been taking cause for the plight of South Africans who, in the majority, are black, that have been victimized, that have been discriminated unconstitutionally and unlawfully by these banks, where their property has been dispossessed, which itself is a violation of the constitution of the republic. So here we have others making noises on why you can't go and have land expropriation without compensation, but the banks are on a daily basis actually violating section 25 of the constitution of the country, but also violating a raft of other laws, among others that of unlawfully discriminating, where it has been proven, and Emerald van Zyl, as a lawyer, has got substantive evidence to that effect, having demonstrated amply on that black people in the main have been discriminated, either as business or their businesses, or in their person in terms of their personal loans and credit and anything else that they have really suffered at the hands of these banks. That the question then becomes what needs to be done next. And I think what we can expect of Emerald van Zyl is to share with us some of the actions that he has taken. I'm aware that he had a meeting sometime last year with economic freedom fighters, and my understanding is that Godrich Gadi, who is himself a lawyer, has since, based on some of the evidential material that Emerald Van Zyl provided, is also pursuing a course of action in our courts. But I think, if anything, we, at the end of this Twitter space, we would be able to, I think, all agree on the next course of action, that I think there has to be an increase in the what must be done against these banks, because what they are doing is unlawful, and therefore, when injustice is made law, which is not passed by parliament, resistance is a duty of any patriotic citizen, but more so the victims, that something has to be done. And we have to challenge our courts, that the judiciary itself, it has to demonstrate that it has not been captured. Because if the judiciary was not captured, if the judiciary was not bribed, if the judiciary was not corrupt, there is absolutely no way that the banking mafia would have been allowed to continue with the cases that certainly are unlawful in the extreme. But it's because we have not asked hard questions of our judiciary, and that the judicial officers, and specifically the judges who preside on a daily basis on the violation of constitutional rights of citizens, when they actually are supposed to be the night watchmen that ensure that this constitution and this democracy can live for many. So I think those are the issues. Maybe I just wanted to underpin the importance of this Twitter space here this evening, and on why every South African must be concerned, must therefore be interested on the action that must be taken to bring to an end to this violation. And with that, I think let's try and bring Reg on board, so that also we can then allow engagement, whilst we also try and get Emerald Van Zyl on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Tsepo. I'm trying to get Reg, but he seems to have deactivated his mic, because I don't get any indication that he's got a mic active. Something has gone wrong there. He's online, but his mic is not working. Reg, can you indicate to me if you can hear me? Can you try to activate your mic so that you can actually speak? Well, unfortunately, I don't think at this stage we are able to get Reg online. I'm going to open our conversation now to some of those of you who have asked to speak, to start giving inputs, and also, of course, to give us an indication of your personal experiences with these racist banks. And then we can proceed from there to hopefully get both Reg, our co-host, and also one of our main guests to speak, and also Emerald Van Zyl to join us. I'm going to ask Harold, who's requested to speak, to come in. Harold, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Comrade Koff, and to your co-host. When I saw the topic, I was hoping that definitely that Mr. Van Zyl would be here, because of his astounding revelations of the banking sector and what the conduct entails. And I think he will give more specifics, but it's safe to say that the implications of what he says, what he will detail, is that basically economic terrorism has been perpetrated on Black South Africans as a demographic. And if you look at the definition of crimes of humanity, that is what is when a demographic is targeted and trauma or is perpetrated on them by the extent of them, like financially, like they have been doing, a crime has been perpetrated. And it's astounding that, and when it's with the full knowledge of the government and they do nothing, then it constitutes a crime against humanity. So it's not merely just discrimination and oppression, it's a crime against humanity. And I mean, this is not the first time in recent time. I mean, this has been over since close to 94 that he's cracked this. But just recently with the incident during President Zuma's administration, when several banks, international banks and domestic banks, conducted themselves with colluding amongst each other to cause rand manipulation, that too was economic terrorism. And it seems like we as a tendency, as a nation, tend to just overlook these type of things or not be really outraged to take action. And I mean, there's so many incidents of this nature that doesn't just normal breaking of our laws, but as I say, you know, it's terrorism, and that it constitutes in the international law as crimes against humanity. So I hope that Mr. Van Zyl will have will join your space and give more further details to it, because what he's discovered is profound and heinous, to say the least. Yes, I think I'll leave it there. There was obviously this topic is so vital with all the other things that's going on with our president, not to say with his Palapala farm scandal and stuff. But however, there's a rising thing with our Chief Justice as well, that will put the state capture report in not even in jeopardy, but voided, as I've discovered that what he spoke at the JC interviews, where he actively assisted and participated in the constitutional powers exercised by Chief Justice Mogoeng. And it's a known fact that not only any person, but a public official specifically cannot benefit from a process that you participate in. So he was helping the Chief Justice, and he says it in the JC interviews, which is basically under oath, when he was interviewing for the position of Chief Justice. And he says that he was calling other candidate judges and advising the Chief Justice. And then the Chief Justice couldn't find one, and then he pointed at him and says, and then he was thinking beforehand what he was going to say. And when he said, don't you want to do it? He had no hesitation of said yes. That is by definition a conflict of interest. And I wonder if President Zuma was aware of this before he took the recommendation of Chief Mogoeng and appointed Zondo as the commissioner. And if that's the case, then he had no legal standing to be the commissioner. And I mean, the implications is that 1 billion and 3 years of South Africa and the public's life and resources was wasted on a commission where he had no legal standing to be the commissioner. So I'm not sure when people will come to this understanding, and journalists will pick it up and ask the Chief Justice more details. And of course, the Chief Justice Mogoeng, who has gone into hiding, and you can't actually really get him. He comes up once in a while on an interview with JJ, and you know, but he's as if he's in hiding. And there's a lot of things that he needs to account for and answer, especially this. Because it means that if the way they conducted themselves improperly and irrational, because we all remember when President Zuma removed Pravin Gordhan from his cabinet, he was taken to court, and Judge Vali held that he had to keep every record of his decision, and that President Zuma said that it was prerogative powers. However, they disagreed. The Judge Vali disagreed and said that he had to keep all the advices, all the documents, all the recordings, all the minutes of how he arrived at the decision to remove. So therefore, that would apply equally on your executive powers as when you appoint a commissioner. So how Chief Justice Mogoeng conducted himself should be exactly how President Zuma or any president would have to conduct themselves in a selection process for a position in terms of the Constitution. So the fact is that we are sitting with a Chief Justice now that may have been guilty of misconduct and judicial misconduct and judicial malpractice, and is not fit to be the Chief Justice at this time as well. So our President and our Chief Justice at this moment are facing accusations now and allegations which are very credible, that they are not fit to to be in those positions. I will leave it at there. Thank you, Comrade Carl, for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the other speakers on the topic of the racist banks.
Thank you so much, Harold. I've got a couple of people who have requested to be speakers. I'm going to give an opportunity to Ayanda, but let me just say, before we proceed, there seemed to be a problem with Regge's mic that he's not activated it. I don't know if it is a connection problem. I don't know if he can hear me. Perhaps it is better if he exits the space and comes back in, because at the moment, although I'm trying to activate him, I'm failing to do so. I think I should also mention that perhaps I should have said this right at the beginning of this conversation. We have invited Dr. Iqbal Survey to join us. He has indicated his preparedness to participate, but unfortunately not today. He's got other commitments. So at a later stage, we will have another Twitter Spaces where we deal with issues not only around our banking system and the racism of our banking system, but also the specific legal actions and repressive actions that have been taken against the independent group, IO, and everything that happened there, and also the negative reporting and character assassination that had been launched against Dr. Survey. But unfortunately, he will not join us today, so we will try to bring him in at a later stage. I now want to give an opportunity to Ayanda Miratlana to join us and to give us an input. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. Thank you very much, Tsepo and Reg. In as much as I wanted to speak after the guests, but let me just have my input. It is disgusting. It's very disgusting to hear what these banks are doing right in front of our own eyes. We like watching them, but we have nothing to do. We are just participate as chickens with headless chickens. It's so sad when you read what FNB, for an example, is saying. When it closes down the accounts, it says it closes down the accounts because of reputation and business risks that they might find. Therefore, they opt to close accounts. There's no reasoning after that. There's no explanation on why they are closing people's accounts. We should remember that they close the Gupta's accounts without even any explanation. They are now struggling to close some people's accounts which are their favorites. It's so unfortunate that Mr. Van Zyl, for so many years, he's been fighting endlessly with these banks, and there's absolutely few of cases that he won. So it shows that he is against bigger fishes. He is against big people that are behind these banks. So I'm not sure if he wants to continue, but I think he is closer to winning the case, given the recent outcomes now of the president getting involved in these racist banks. You find that Mr. Van Zyl has ever been saying banks are perpetuating racism, and it's been like that for years. They have been doing that for years, and we've been living under that norm, and we've accepted it as something to live by. And I discovered that Zondo Commission also found Nedbank and Standard Bank guilty of conflict of interests and double standard. But we don't hear about that in the news. Nobody is talking about that because it's not an interest of the capital system. They don't want us to focus on serious issues. Banking is a daily thing. We do banking daily. It's like the bread of life. So therefore, if we get the banking system correct, everything else will fall into place. What shocked me recently is the fact that the guy that was found to be a burglar there, in fact, the few guys that were found to be burglars there in Palapala farm, they deposited their monies in an account, 3.5 million rands in their accounts. And then they bought cars at Byron's in their 400,000 cars. But FNB did not even see the red light, did not even see that to check this account and verify them. We know that FNB Gold Check Card is one of the lowest accounts that you can find at Nedbank. So you actually, as a bank, you can notice that there can be money laundering there. So these people, they clean their money at FNB, their dirty money at FNB, and FNB needs to answer about that. And I'm not surprised that even the sealed CR17 bank accounts, FNB is the one who's holding those accounts. So everything is upside down. So I look at the CEOs of these major banks. They are black, most of them. But there's no democracy within them. It shows that there is fronting as well amongst these banks. These people, they can do nothing as the leaders of these banks. They do nothing. The owners of the banks, they tell them what to do. So the person who said nationalization is the way to go, not only nationalization of the Reserve Bank, but nationalization of all banks. We cannot rely on criminals who are holding our monies, our futures. We cannot rely on them, people who've been doing this racism for years and years and years. I agree with somebody who said, I read about this on the internet. He said apartheid is found in every bank. So we need to nationalize all these banks. Thank you very much, Carl.
Thank you so much. We are still battling, unfortunately, all of you who are part of our Twitter Spaces conversation, to get Regge Nkosi back on. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask Real Democracy, who is requested to speak, to come in. Real Democracy, please come in.
Good evening, Carl. Good evening, people on the space. Thank you for having us on and hosting this very important topic. Carl, what I'd like to talk about is the banks and bonds, mortgage bonds. There is a modus operandi that all the banks are guilty of, where they wait for the slightest default after 12 to 18 years and start proceedings on your bond, send you summons, get a default judgment. Most people don't know what to do when they get a summons. They don't even bother to go and go to court and say that they have a defense. Usually, when they do that, the banks write to the court and say, no, that's a frivolous defense, and the person is just trying to be, to delay the process. So they foreclose, they sell the house, they evict the person. At the end of it all, the mortgage, the bondholder has paid 150% plus. Some are, if you take say 100,000 bond, some have already paid nearly 200,000, nearly double that. And so the bank has got double their money and they've got the house. So I think that is totally unfair. We have the NCA. There is a section in the NCA called, well, they call it the induplum rule. And it's section 1035, where they say that when you have paid double, then that should be considered as your bond paid off. You know, any loan that is registered under the NCA should be considered as paid off once you paid double. But lawyers see it in a different way. The banks see it differently. And there was some matter that was brought to the Western Cape High Court where there was the Stellenbosch Law Clinic sought clarity on some items, on the meaning of 1035, and the court did give some, but it would seem that they, in clearing up certain questions, other questions have cropped up. I think what needs to be clarified now is 1035. Is it fair to say that when you pay double your bond or what you borrowed, that surely this should be over? The banks add on and on and on, interest upon interest, compounded. And in my mind, I think that is unfair. There are rules about unfair enrichment, and I think that is definitely unfair enrichment. The lawyers, I'm not a lawyer, so the lawyers amongst us, can you please look into this? NCA rule or clause 1035. It's called the induplum. Carl, that's as much as I've got to say, but you know, the banks are basically lawless. The attorneys that you might, or advocates that you might take to court do not work in your interest because they have a conflict. If they win on your behalf, they're going to lose with the banks because the banks won't give them any conveyancing work thereafter. They know that. That's an unwritten threat, and no lawyer will work in your interest. They'll take your money, they'll appear for you, but they will not win your matter. So there is a conflict there, and I think that also needs to be addressed. I thank you, Carl.
Thank you very much. I also want to comment about what one of our previous speakers, Harold, had said about the manner in which our banks are intervening and closing bank accounts. There are so many examples of this, and perhaps I should refer to a personal example of what many of you may have seen in the media. I found myself in the most unenvious situation when, from the side of IO, which is one of the companies where Dr. Iqbal's survey is involved in, I was given a small payment of 30,000 Rand for some work that I had done for them in terms of consultancy. And then suddenly, Nedbank came with a statement that as one of the reasons why they are closing IO's Nedbank accounts is because monies had been paid over by IO into my personal account, and they described me as a politically implicated or politically exposed person. Now, they didn't say that any of us had committed any crime. In fact, they stated categorically that they don't have any reason to believe that we have committed any crime. But at the same time, they proceeded to say that as a private business, and that is why I've initially read out that quote from the very seminal article by Regge Nkosi, as a private business, they've got the right to decide who they want to associate with and not, and they can close the bank accounts of anyone that they do not want to associate with. So the conclusion one can come to is that if Nedbank doesn't like what Carl Niehaus has to say about any of the political developments in South Africa, or that Carl Niehaus expresses some criticism of their darling Cyril Ramaphosa, they will then not only victimize Carl Niehaus, but they will victimize anyone who does business with him. Now, as far as I can see, this is unconstitutional. It doesn't reflect what should be the rights of us as individual citizens in this country to be able to make a living, to be able to conduct business, to be able to be part of the banking system, which is absolutely essential if you do want to be effective and participate in the South African economy. So that is the background of some of these situations, and I'm only giving my own example as one personal example. There are many others, and I think we should be grateful for the way in which Emerald van Zyl and also Dr. Iqbal Survey has been taking on these racist banks and has also pointed out that their conduct is actually unconstitutional. I'm going to now give an opportunity to another guest of ours who has requested to participate with speaking. His name is John Moganedi. John, I've activated you. I don't see your mic yet, but it should be coming on any moment now. There you are. You can speak. We are still battling, unfortunately, all participants on this Twitter space to get Regge Nkosi back. I don't know exactly what went wrong because he was with us. And we are also still battling to get Emerald van Zyl online. Job, can you please proceed? Job, can you proceed? I've activated you as a speaker and your mic is on as far as I can see. You have to unmute yourself to speak, Job. So please unmute your mic and then come in.
Hi, how's everyone? Excuse me, I pressed the request by mistake. Thanks for the opportunity, though.
Please proceed, Job. You have muted your mic once again. Just
Okay,
keep your fingers away from that small screen.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Please.
All right, thanks. I hear what everyone is saying. However, I think that we as progressive people should look at how we organize ourselves. If you look at other like your Afri forums or so on, they are very organized as a structures and they are able to take anyone to court. However, we as Africans in particular have not been able to come together without being necessarily in any particular political organization and form what you call pressure groups and so on, which are organized, which are not necessarily political, however, have a particular mandate to look at the interest of what our societies are going through. So what I would say is that the initiative has been started in some quarters, and I think that maybe over time people will get to know, so that we can participate in every space that is available, that to challenge without necessarily being taking political decisions. I mean, we leave that to political organizations, but not reinvent the wheel as well. So what I would say is that people need to consider that we need to look at such structures and say how we can be able, as communities, as people of the country, come together. Because as long as we speak as individuals, these banks are not going to listen to us. Whoever has got the power was never going to listen. But if we organize as a grouping and say, we are not necessarily a political organization, but this is what is important, we can even challenge the courts. But as long as we go as individuals, we're actually going to end nowhere. Thank you.
Thank you. We are still battling to get our two hosts who were supposed to give us input back in. I'm going to give an opportunity to Tsepo Khadima to come in and respond to some of the comments that have been made until now, while I'm still continuing to try to bring our guests back online. Thank you. Tsepo?
No, thank you, Carl. It appears because the Twitter space collapsed and we had to restart afresh. So maybe this time it appears that two guests, because it's just that we will keep on trying. And also, this point in time, I should give a disclaimer. I think both Carl and myself
Tsepo, I don't know what's happened now. Now we can't hear you either. Are you able to try and activate your mic again?
from being able to, in general terms, to be able to speak on what are some of the measures that can be taken by any one of us on matters of a financial nature. Anyway, I think the discussion as it goes, I just want to emphasize the point that every single person who is on this Twitter space, they are advised and encouraged to go and look at the interest that they pay on any credit that they have with the banks, whether for a mortgage, for a vehicle, or anything of that nature, both personally as well as their business. And you will be horrified to find that each and every one of you, on the basis of your skin color, you have been discriminated on the basis of your perceived politics that maybe are less kosher. Again, you are being discriminated by first you being overcharged interest, and not only being overcharged interest, but overcharged interest so that in the end, it becomes you are put into a condition of default, so that your property that you would have worked so hard for gets to be foreclosed and taken away by the bank. So that's number one. So therefore, every single person, we need to go and look at those that have credit, go and see how much you are paying. And if you have received any Section 129 letter or anything like that, you have to question the manner in which interest has been calculated. And I think our guest we are trying to connect, Emerald Fanzale, as a lawyer, has shown and amply demonstrated that in almost all of the cases, whenever the banks move on you, you'll find that they miscalculated interest and they've overcharged you interest you were supposed to have been paid. Therefore, meaning that whatever claim they are putting in court, it is not a liquid claim, and then you have got a defense. And therefore, you should pursue that defense, because many times people, when they receive a letter from a sheriff or anything like that, they become embarrassed and they don't want to assert their rights, and therefore they are discriminated and abused by these banks, which themselves have just shown that indeed they will act unlawfully, and there's no stopping to the extent to which they will act unlawfully. So that is very important, that every single South Africans, because by the sheer weight of numbers, we should be able to defeat this evil system of the banking mafiocracy. But if very few people actually pursue those legal remedies, it is for that reason that we find that they've been going easy. The other thing is that we have to make it normal in South Africa to question the conduct of the courts, because there are so many people, in their hundreds of thousands, if not millions, who have lost their property unlawfully, whereby court orders are being created that a court order that doesn't exist whatsoever, there would have been no court sitting whatsoever, but they lose their property. And the other point is that you'll find that people have lost their homes when the so-called order that was that gave rise to their property being auctioned was not granted by a judge, but was actually simply signed by a registrar. But that is unlawful itself. The registrar of the court has got no judicial powers to be able to grant an order on immovable property, which is a house. But yet, hundreds of thousands of South Africans continue to lose their houses because the banks find it a little bit more too difficult to have to follow due process, many times because also they will have not followed the proper procedures in terms of the interest that is due and payable on that loan they would have advanced you. So they bribe their way effectively. There's no other way of putting it. It is bribery and corruption that they then pursue with the judicial officers and in many instances with the registrars of the courts. So we have a corrupt and rotten system, but the problem is that if we as South Africans continue to take it in good faith that the courts are acting responsibly, we will continue to see the perpetuation of this injustice and practices that are just blatantly against all manner of laws, including even international law. So it is very important. We cannot overemphasize the need for South Africans to be aware of their rights and to be able to exercise those rights so that this evil system can be defeated. And we can only defeat it by the weight of numbers. So therefore, the speaker who's saying we need to ourselves be organized as Black people and to be able to embark on a class action type suit, that is so important. And hopefully at the end of this Twitter space, we can be able to maybe start a new movement that will ensure that we take the power back from the banking mafiocracy in this country, which has caused so much untold financial, economic, and social harm to the many citizens of this country. So that's the point that I wanted to make, and hopefully our two guests will be able to join us, even though they are, for some reason, they are the only ones that are battling to join this space, it would appear. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Tepu. We still don't have our two guests joining us. I think the point that you made, that the changes that we want to see in our banking system will not come about by us simply complaining here on this Twitter space. We have to mobilize. We have to challenge the racist system and the banking system in our courts, but also we have to mobilize to be out there on the streets, embarrassing them and coming out as a people's movement in order to get our banking system to start changing so that it will indeed be able to address the needs of our people. I think we should encourage those who have been part of the anti-racist bank campaign, and we should encourage more South Africans to join that campaign as much as possible. I have now a number of people who have requested to participate to speak. I see there's a request from Thokozani Ndzima. I'm adding you as a speaker, Thokozani, and you will be able to come in and speak. We wait for a moment until your mic is activated.
Carl, I hear the speakers. I think all the speakers are talking about the banks being the problem. But what solutions can we use? Remember, the money that we pay, it's our money, okay? What solutions can we use in the meantime while we can still be fighting the banks? We know currently with our justice system, we might not be able to even win cases out there. But what can we use to ensure that we this is our money, we muscle back our money? For example, how can we come together and join in purchasing property jointly? If you can take, if your bond is about 10,000 rands every month, and there is about 1 million of us, black people or people who are radical in terms of fighting this banking system. If we put that money together in one pot, it becomes just 10 million in 1 month, right? We can be able to purchase a number of properties, cash. If we can then be able to put together such a system where we club together and we move out of the bond market, because the very same bonds that we take, the bank still goes and trades them over, and it makes way more money. If we can be able to take back our purchasing power in us be coming together, because in that way, my money is my money, and the bank can only take it if I sign for those huge interests, where they then look, he's black, then we charge him higher. But if we can then club together as people who are of the same mindset, let's leave maybe skin color, but once we are of the same mindset, then we can club together and look, how can we help one another? We don't need to even know each other face to face, but if we can be able to reach a common ground, have proper documentations, have proper paperwork, then we come together and then we club, and then we then have an impact. The banks will be forced to change because they will lose a lot of money. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm now handing over to Mbali, who's requested to speak. And I think the point that you made, Toko, that it's important for us to call on our people to work together, to mobilize together. And in fact, we can mobilize in ways where we do not even need to be physically together in the same space, is absolutely important. Mbali, open and over to you.
Good evening, sir. Thanks for the mic. Good evening to all the listeners. I'll try to be brief. I can only imagine that your queue is long for speakers. A lot of topics are being brought on. I'm not really just sticking to this particular thing that is happening at this particular moment. I am now going back to history. You know what? I have a TV which is off all the time because there's a lot of not, I don't want to say the word, okay, nonsense that comes out of there. I want to put on the table that you may table on a later date in your spaces. May you correct me? I think there was once a time, a few years back, I read that there is only one company that has been fueling the airplanes fuel, our airplanes fuel. It's been contracted to them for years. There's contracts for years, for 100 years. That doesn't make sense to me. Hence, may we go back to where these dealings were brought in. Let's not just face this Palapala farm issue. May we also just address to where everything else started. We are not only waking up now. Well, I'm not only waking up now. This one, I think it's an opportunity, if I can say, for us to say, look, this needs to step. This needs to now stop. Sorry. There is a company, I won't name its name, that is everywhere. I'm sorry, maybe if it might be, you might be a shareholder, I don't know. I'm just speaking to Mbali as like, thank you for the space, first of all. And like, finally, we are addressing these issues. There's this company that is taking over it's everywhere. Okay. I'm not going to mention it in case you guys might, okay, I'm sorry if, yeah, I'm putting you, because I don't know what's going on anymore. However, thank you for giving me the mic. However, something really needs to happen now because we can't be just holding spaces. Although I recommend you, it's a start. It's a start because even in the other spaces that I join weekly, once, twice or so, it's like Uncle Carl's, if you say, okay, Mbali, we're going to vote on Thursday, who am I going to vote for? Help me. Can the listeners, can the hosts, can the co-host, who am I going to vote for? Because it's like we are now living as, okay, they struggled for us in the past. Yes, they did. And yes, we appreciate it. And yes, they had to. And yes, it's in my blood. And yes, it's in my DNA. Because my parents also were part of the movement. Yes, they were, actually. Very much were. It's in my DNA. But now, okay, it's a start. We're holding spaces to now have the voices out there. Can there now also be a next step? Because I actually switched off Twitter today because I saw some 2 million, I don't know what animal was being sold at that farm to distract us, like, oh no, this is normal business. This is actually what happens. We sell cows and these animals from Africa for 4 million, like just one. And I was like, no, man, no, don't play with my mind like that. I'm not stupid. So thanks for giving me the mic. I can assume there's a lot more people that want to speak. I'll keep it brief. I'm very frustrated. I don't want to lie. I'm very frustrated because I'm being failed. I'm being failed, and I have the intelligence and I have the everything. And I have, not me, the black masses have. I'm not talking about me when I'm not saying me. I'm just so frustrated. And yes, it was Formula One. That's another thing. That's another frustration. But this one, for me to request a mic from you, sir, from you, and I come from a background I don't even want to say. My mother, my dad, we struggle. My societal, it's in my DNA. When is this going to stop? And I remember I used to live in Protea. I don't care. Come for me. I don't care. I used to live in Protea a long way back. And no, I won't say this. And the person, his home was in Shawelo, which is not far from Protea. So he is supposed to be my icon. Ganti, no. Ganti, no. All of you guys are failing us. Ganti, no. Who is our leader? Or must I lead myself? Must I do my own thing? It has to stop. It not that it has to stop. It won't stop immediately. It's obviously impossible. But can you or the listeners or the co-hosts give us a direction of which to take? Because my high and intolerable at the moment. Thank you. Emotional. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mbali. And I must admit that listening to you makes me emotional. And when you ask me the question, must I receive a mic from you, sir? It hurts. Because as members and leaders of the African National Congress, one of the most important things I think we must do at this stage in the history of the ANC is to humble ourselves and to say that we have failed in many ways dismally. I think we also have to acknowledge that the current leadership of the African National Congress are failing the ANC dismally. President Ramaphosa and those around him are destroying the African National Congress. I want to continue to call on you and my fellow South Africans to have hope that the African National Congress can self-correct. When you ask me the question, if there's an election tomorrow, who must I vote for? My first inclination, my immediate reaction is to say, vote for the African National Congress. But I know immediately when I say that I'm talking here about a historical organization and liberation movement that at the moment is not servicing the people of our country, is not behaving like the leader of society, is failing our people dismally and hurting our people deeply. So the one thing that I can continue to say is that the current leadership of the African National Congress, President Ramaphosa, and in fact, the whole National Executive Committee of the African National Congress has to go. We need a full renewal of leadership. And we need a movement from a grassroots level of our membership of the African National Congress, of our branches, to rise up, to get rid of this failing and rogue leadership, and to elect a leadership that will reflect their hopes and wishes and will implement the policy program for radical economic transformation, which includes also a fundamental transformation of our banking system. That is absolutely critical. And each one of us have to take responsibility to achieve that. These Twitter spaces is only a small place where we can try to help to mobilize. There's much better and bigger work that we need to do in our society, and those of us who are ANC members within our branches and within our structures. We need to mobilize to get rid of those who have sold us out and who have deliberately been infiltrated into the African National Congress in order to destroy the ANC. I'm now going to hand over to Nsong, who has requested to speak. And after that, it is going to be Mapshuma, I think. The name is not very clear. But Nsong, I'm handing the mic over to you.
Good evening, Mr. Carl, and the listeners in here. Thank you for the opportunity I'm getting. I've been listening shortly, but I heard Tozan speaking, and I think a lot of things he said, I agree with him. We need to start our own banks. That way only we are going to ensure that these humiliations racist banks are giving us ends. I'm just a young man who just started working civil servant, and when I go to a bank, borrowed some money, I was given a 27% interest. I was wondering, why would you give me, a civil servant who has got a permanent job, a 27% interest? Are you saying I'm that untrusted? Yet my peer, white guy who is employed in a private sector, gets into a bank, borrowed money, he got 7% interest. So you'll see, Uguti, we are a mess of a country. And thanks to some of the leaders of the ANC, and when you listen to Umbali, you hear Uguti, we get furious to even think, Uguti, what has the ANC done for us? Even those sunset clauses that were signed, they are telling us when we face such situations that we are all on our own. That's all I wanted to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Comrade Khalid,
Tebu, you can come in.
There. Yeah, I think Reg is trying to join us. I'm looking for him. He's requesting to speak. I think as he signed in on another account because his account is stopped from. We must find Kujo and allow him to speak because he's a guest. But look, one of the things that maybe the listeners here we should consider to do is that tomorrow we should engage the taxi industry. The taxi industry collectively between Santaco and NTA, the National Taxi Alliance, they collectively have got a fleet of taxis in excess of 300,000, and they collectively are the biggest public transport system in the country that is responsible for ferrying over 16 million passengers a day. But people might not be aware of the impact of the economy, but also the discrimination that they too suffer. Because most of the taxis that you see on the roads are financed at least 10 to 12% above prime. Some of them are paying 15% above prime. And that is discrimination that is provable. The weight of the numbers of the organized transport industry, public transport industry, which is the taxi industry, for them to stand up and join us in the march, in the people's movement, to bring an end to this, to catch the attention of the authorities immediately if we have a large, powerful, organized transport industry formation such as the taxi industry to really be able to join us in this war to bring an end to this evil. One thing is very clear, must be clear to all of us. Let's not delude ourselves. Beyond the ANC, all of the political parties represented in parliament, all the 400 members of parliament, not a single one of them cares about any one of us, because if they did, it doesn't mean there's any one member of parliament who can plead ignorance about the abusive and discriminatory practices of the banking cartels and the mafia. They know, and yet they choose to turn and look the other way. Not a single one of them has got the guts. And the judiciary as well. Every single day, just this very week, there's going to be so many people who are going to suffer at the hands of these racist banks, and yet the judiciary is turning and looking the other way. Therefore, we have to demand as citizens that their failure to act as members of parliament and as the judiciary will each drive us or drive most of us into a self-help situation. And self-help is anarchy. And when we can be able to come together in the numbers, that anarchy no one can afford. Therefore, it's important that I think we should embark on that course of action. I just wanted to underpin that point. I see Regge is on board, and then it's good that maybe we can allow him on. Thank you.
Thank you, Tepo. I'm so happy to see Regge is on board. Regge, we have already introduced you. I've also provided 2 quotes from your very seminal article that appeared in the Independent online. And I'm now handing over to you. It is a little bit topsy-turvy because we would have preferred you to speak at the beginning of this Twitter Spaces conversation, but better late than never. Welcome.
Thanks, Comrade Carr, and thanks, Tepo. I did listen to the introduction and the quotes and quite a few other issues that you raised right from the beginning as I was in, but somehow the system failed me. Those of you watching, I'm logged in as Kuto. That's my son's system now. Yeah, if I can start. Again, colleagues, South Africa and perhaps much of Africa is in a capitalist, or we are in a capitalist system. Whether this system is financial capitalism or industrial capitalism, as it used to be, it doesn't really matter, but we're in a financial system. Now, at the heart of capitalism, I mean, in the capitalist system, at the heart of capitalism are fundamentally 2 systems. The financial system, you may want to call it a banking system, and the legal system. These are mutually supportive systems. From a legal perspective, you'd appreciate that law
or rather the legal system then was created for property rights, to enforce property rights. And property at that particular point in time in the classical times was defined as, land, buildings and stuff like that. And those obviously who didn't have land could get their land from either the king or the queen or whatever authority that was there at that particular point in time. But the legal system was there to enforce property rights. Now, what happened to those people who never had land or any property? They had to go and borrow some money from a brother or a sister or some institution of some sort. Now, during that classical times, the definition of property wasn't that broad. So Karl Marx, as some of you may remember, redefined what property is and said property includes capital. So property rights, therefore, shall mean enforcing capital rights. So capitalism itself is very much tied to the enforcement of it as a system, legally to support it so that it's able to stand and prosper. Now, since these are mutually supportive issues, then scholars had to find out to say, all right, capital, how is capital coming into the whole picture? And of course, banking systems there were quite immature at that particular point in time in these classical times. However, as the world developed, the banking systems began to grow. Now, for the legal system to stand, it had to depend on what a banking system is supposed to be for the society and what the banking system is for, right? So they developed theories. I can hear some bit of noises there. Can you hear me properly? Thank you.
We can hear you. Can I ask all the speakers that I have activated as speakers to please mute your mics? Because if you keep your mic on and there's background noise, it becomes very disturbing for the person who has the mic and who's speaking. So please mute your mics. Thank you.
Thanks.
Regge, you can proceed.
Yeah, thanks, Comrade Carr. So for banking purposes, there essentially were three theories that came up. I would mention two theories which are very common, from which the legal system drew its standing. Essentially, the first one was the financial intermediation theory, and the second one was the fractional reserve theory of banking. Now, these theories are fairly similar in a way, but these theories characterized a bank as a firm, as a company. And therefore, the legal system had to see banks as would be any other firm. So while these theories were very common, they were sadly very erroneous. And in fact, it's until recently that banks and indeed academics as well have come to realize that these theories are very, very misleading. The central banks have come to accept that these theories are misleading, but they are nonetheless taught in all key universities that one can go to today. Right as we speak right now, they continue to teach these erroneous theories that were brought up quite a long time back. Therefore, banking and money, or banks and money, are not really understood in economics. Only the heterodox people or heterodox economists are able to understand fully these two issues or these two concepts, banking and money. And to the extent that there's this confusion, therefore, some bankers who do know exactly what banking is all about continue to confuse the public. And the behavior that comes out of that is that of confusion, because they understand that the communities do not really understand about banking, and they continue to confuse. So we have one professor at Harvard who actually said, well, banking and money, complex as they are, they're actually there to fool quite a number of people. Those who practice them eventually end up confusing society. And perhaps one of the reasons why we're having this behavior, very queer behavior of banking, is because people don't understand banking itself, and banks themselves also do not know who they are at some point in time, it seems. Yeah, so yet banking and money, they constitute the core of macroeconomics. And what we have is a set of economies coming up really not fully aware of what banks are and what banks do. So what triggered my interest in writing this article was to sort of clarify as to what banks do, essentially. But it came because also there were quite a few articles in the newspapers. The one that caught my attention was the COVID loan guarantee scheme, where Tito Mboweni went out into the public to say that, well, the failure or the collapse of the loan guarantee scheme was because the banking system could not budge, could not lend. In effect, what he was essentially saying is that the economy was rendered inoperative. We couldn't recover from this COVID crisis as a consequence of the bank failing to lend. Yet, he was the Minister of Finance at that particular point in time. He had all the authority to force the banks to lend. Why the word force? Perhaps some people may wonder, why should the minister force? It's because banks, while they're obviously known as firms, they're actually institutions carrying a duty that is state in its nature. I'll discuss this issue a bit further. And according to Tito Mboweni, the president also came in and they told him, well, look, we're not interested. We have been instructed by the Reserve Bank to lend as usual. Yet, both the Reserve Bank as an organ of state and Treasury, as well as banks themselves, understood quite well that the economy was in a crisis that was considered to be one in a century crisis, and therefore their coming to party to assist was very essential. They nonetheless rejected that. That surely should have caused a lot of consternation in government, and they did nothing, it seems, and they're going to do nothing. Why? We do not know. We're going to have to look at this as we go along. The one other issue that forced me to put my ideas was the that of Sekunjalo, I think it's Sekunjalo Holdings. This is Igbasov's companies that are now, whose accounts are now being closed on the understanding that Sekunjalo or Igbo himself is posing a reputational risk to the banking system. Therefore, they have to close. Well, the question that really arises is, what do banks mean when they say reputational risk? They effectively are saying that they have a reputation which is different from, say, Treasury, okay, as an institution of state. So to them, they're firms, they're not institutions, therefore they are deemed to be operating within a firm's view, not an institutional view, which view would definitely not apply when you come with the notion of reputational risk. You can't easily say there's a reputational risk here for government, therefore we have to close your account, unless such risk was what would be described as of national concern or national interest. But frankly, they wouldn't be a citizen, or at least from Sekunjalo, the way we have come to know Sekunjalo and Igbaso, that he didn't do what would be deemed as issues of national disinterest. So anyway, they continued since this case is with the banks. It's with the courts, and we are waiting adjudication therefrom. Another matter that arose, quite frankly, that I thought I should highlight was the issue of the racialized bank charges against a number of Black people, and mostly the African Africans. We've been reading, and I've been reading myself from a fellow called Emerald, I think it's Fansel, and then a number of lawyers who've come up to say, well, banks are charging, overcharging Africans or blacks in general. Why they do that is not particularly clear. I guess they've got all manner of excuses when it comes to that. So that indeed was those were some of the issues that I sought to highlight in my article. But the last one, very important, was the fact that, or is in fact, the fact that the lending practices of banks generally to SMMEs and blacks constitute what we would normally call quantity rationing. They ration the supply of credit to SMMEs so much so that it's almost impossible to develop the SMME sector in this country. Yet we all know that SMMEs right across the globe are the engine of development, are the engine of employment, and the engine of growth. But in South Africa, as Carr did read earlier on, 19 out of 20 applicants get rejected by banks. Essentially, almost the entire SMME sector is starved of credit. The question that emerges is, what's going to happen to these 19? Yet these 19 firms are supposed to be the creators of jobs, part to the growth of the economy as a whole. So that becomes quite problematic when you look at it. And virtually in all ways, you can configure this issue in so many aspects, and you realize that I think this type of lending is quite frankly unacceptable. Now, so I tried to put it to citizens that, look, while banks behave in this manner, they actually should not behave in this manner, because they're institutions. By institutions, I meant that there are organizations whose primary purpose is to serve society. And if you are an organization whose primary purpose is to serve society, and especially serving society on behalf of government or the state itself, it is highly uncalled for that you should begin to be shutting accounts of the very citizens that you're supposed to be supporting. Because the banks generally are, in fact, not only conducting or servicing us what is known as a state function. Banking, by its very definition, is a state function. Or money as an institution can only be created by state. The prerogative to create money is that of state, and any institution that is being licensed to create money is therefore creating money on behalf of the state. And to the extent that a citizen is out there wanting a government service, that citizen must necessarily have that service. So I came to write this, that the behavior of banking in closing accounts is fundamentally at odds with what banking is all about and what banks' duties are supposed to be. And what is shocking, however, is that the regulators, which in this case is the Reserve Bank and or Treasury, have remained mum. And the question is, but why are regulators who should be very much aware that commercial banks are performing a duty that is a state duty? Why are they so quiet and not coming to the rescue of not only the SMMEs, but the majority of blacks in the country? The answers may lie in fundamentally two areas. The one would be the ignorance by the regulators themselves, not knowing what the role of banks but the role of banks and I'm having a reflect. Okay. Yeah, so it could be by the state. Alternatively, it's because of capture. Now, we know in South Africa that 95% of all the money that is created in our system is created by commercial banks. Government is only able to create about 5% of this money. And therefore, government is a very small actor in the business of creating money. And to the extent that banks are the major suppliers of money, that's money supply, and to the extent that money itself is an institution of state or is an institution, that banks frown on blacks and frown on SMMEs and become so restrictive in their lending should surely come as a shock. So that was the study from the University of Stellenbosch that talked about the 19 to 20%, 19 out of 20 SMMEs that are being rejected are credited by the banks. That really means that there will never be any capital accumulation by black majority, and that there will never be an economic growth that will be able to sustain this group of people, or sufficient enough to improve the lives of this sector of the population. Yeah, so this misunderstanding that's there about banking itself perhaps has to be corrected. And legally, legal scholars now have accepted that banks cannot and should not behave as if they are ordinary firms. This view is actually now globally accepted. In Europe, the central bank, the European Central Bank, is actually encouraging lending to, even though not just lending, to open accounts with banks by even hobos, those people who sleep in the streets, because they recognize that they need a service from state. So banks are an infrastructure for monetary policy implementation, just as much as they are an infrastructure for fiscal policy implementation. Now, since we have come to see, therefore, that banks continue to be so racist in the manner, what is it can society do? And what is it that has been done before? If we go back and check, the Treasury as a ministry or the Department of Finance, if we were to ask about the transformation agenda that they have, we are unable to trace what it is exactly that this department is performing in terms of transformation. Almost none. You must remember, while the Reserve Bank is in charge, is the regulator for banks, it receives its mandate essentially from the Treasury. So the Treasury itself has failed the country, either because of capture meaning the Treasury is captured by the banks, or the Treasury itself has chosen to ignore the plight of all these SMMEs, the plight of all these blacks who suffer at the hands of this racist sector. We have nowhere to see the Treasury coming up and saying, well, look, this is the transformation that we want to see. There was only one time that we heard about it, it died off. When you get to the Reserve Bank as the regulator of banks, you find that the Reserve Bank has no transformation agenda at all. But society has kept quiet, both in terms of the Reserve Bank and in terms of the Treasury being informed, or rather, engaging both the Treasury and the Reserve Bank to see what it is that they're doing with regard to transformation of the sector, or transformation, economic transformation in the financial sector. So we have, therefore, two important institutions of state, the Reserve Bank and the Treasury, that can, or that have almost nothing to show with regard to transformation. Another institution, which is the the Parliament, insofar as I know, apart from just one, I think that they did propose a while back that they want to have inputs from citizens as to what should happen with the financial sector, and they called it a financial sector transformation agenda. It died a natural death. In fact, it was during this time, it was in 2017, that I had to go to Parliament as well to make a presentation in regard to how swift and urgent the changes were necessary the changes were needed in the financial sector. I outlined there the changes that are necessary. The changes to me were, first, the amendment of the Reserve Bank Act, the amendment of the Banks Act, and the other related acts, including the Constitution itself. Because firstly, I found that the mandate of the Reserve Bank, which is in the Constitution, is erroneous. They should have never in the first place put that particular mandate in the Constitution. So I outlined that the structural reforms necessary in this country would be those of the financial sector, specifically banks. You'll be shocked that it may be necessary for me to have to reveal here that later on I got removed from that list of...
interrupt you for a second. Jabulani, I've activated you as a speaker, but you've not muted your speaker and you're causing background noise. Please, thank you. Thanks, Reg. You can proceed.
Thank you. Thank you. So my presentation to Parliament was essentially to tell them that unless the landscape of banking in this country changes, the prospects of unemployment, or rather of employment, or the prospects of inequality or equality, the prospects of growth, quite frankly, can be forgotten. And today, the banking sector, as we know, since they're the producers of money, 95% of it, they're essentially the key cog in an economy, without which an economy cannot survive at all. Hence, we're having all these challenges because government cannot finance each and every activity from the fiscal side. So obviously, the country hasn't got so many people from where to take taxes and so on. So the banking sector normally is supposed to assist government in this area. So yes, so the role of banking there, that the allocators of money, the question that arises is, how do they allocate this money that is being created by them? The truth of the matter is, some consumption loans, but when it comes to the productive aspects of the economy, unfortunately, banks do not really want to lend that money to the SMME sector and or to the black generally. So there's racism at the center of banking in this country. But what really frightens me is the capture that I've come to see, or is apparent actually, by the banking sector of the state, of the politicians. The ANC itself hasn't produced any transformation agenda of banking, none whatsoever, apart from the recent pronouncements about nationalization of the Reserve Bank. We should have expected the ANC to be a lot more robust in ensuring that a state banking system must come into play, and a state banking system that's not modeled on the current commercial banking system. A state banking system that is modeled on the German system. And remember, in Germany, 71% of the banking system there, or 71% of the population is served by a public banking system. So in effect, it is the public sector that creates money in Germany and allocates that money to SMEs, to the population at large. In China, it's about 95%. In India, it's about 75%. These are the percentages I'm talking about, the public sector banking system. The recognition that private banks will not be so friendly to the population was well known in some of these countries, Germany in particular. And of course, China, we can't talk much about China. We know it's more of a socialist country. And of course, the banking system there is heavily state. I mean, many people know that they talk about the 4 policy banks in China. Those are just the top big banks. There are community banks there that number thousands. In Germany, it used to be 1.7 thousand public banks. They've reduced the number to about 1,500. They have merged within themselves. Private banks are never supposed to take over public banks in Germany. I suppose the same thing applies in China. So my contribution, therefore, in my presentation to Parliament was to indicate that unless and until we have a fundamentally reorganized banking sector, we can kiss goodbye to the capital accumulation for the blacks. We can kiss goodbye to the SME sector in this country who continue to complain. We can kiss goodbye to macroeconomic stability. I'll stop there, and perhaps you can begin to engage. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Reg, and thanks for the wealth of knowledge that you shared with us. I think the shocking thing that you said is that the Treasury, the Department of Finance, and the banking system has hardly seen any transformation. I want to say that I believe this was done very deliberately. In fact, that the negotiating process that we had in the early 1990s and what followed subsequently, also in terms of the decisions that had been taken during the period of President Nelson Mandela and also President Thabo Mbeki, especially under the finance ministership of Trevor Manuel, was directly meant not to change the banking system and not to change our treasury, to keep the treasury captured by the influence and by the powers of the big financial companies, white monopoly capitalist companies in South Africa. And I think we all know that it was at the time when President Jacob Zuma decided that he's going to move on the treasury because he wanted to see transformation within the treasury, that the whole campaign that President Zuma had to be removed was thrown into top gear. That some of our ministers, which I believe are agents within our ranks for white monopoly capitalism, among them also Mr. Gordon, went to London, actually reported to some of the big banks in London, and he made sure that the situation was going to be changed, and eventually the banks and the big monopoly companies in South Africa forced President Zuma to appoint Pravin Gordhan as Minister of Finance. This is the background of what we are faced with, and it is absolutely banks and our Treasury Department minister. How is it that action is taken against Iqbal's survey, against IO, against the, while companies that have clearly committed crimes, not only locally, but internationally, such as Glencore and Steinhoff. In fact, Steinhoff, the biggest fraud scandal, corporate fraud scandal in the history of South Africa, still have their bank accounts perfectly in place. Tsepo, I want to suggest that you perhaps make a few comments. I noticed that you keep on being kicked out. I'm not trying to be paranoid, but I'm beginning to suspect foul play. The way in which Reg was unable to join us, the manner in which it continues to be impossible for Emerald to join us, and the way in which Tsepo is battling to stay online makes me a little bit suspicious. Tsepo, do you want to come in?
Comrade Carr, just before Tsepo comes in.
Yes, please proceed.
Thanks. As part of my efforts to talk to my colleagues, former colleagues in government, I had to make an appointment with a DDG there to see if at all I can have audience with him in regard to how to transform the banking sector in this country. So what I did as part of my efforts, therefore, aside from those of Parliament, was to write some 4 or so pager explaining to the Treasury. And this pager can actually be made available, or I can even put it on my Twitter, because our public knowledge. Explain the Treasury.
Make it available. I think it will be very interesting for us to receive it. Thanks. Please proceed.
Yeah. So I went to Department of Treasury to inform my colleagues there that, look, unless we are going to have to change, unless we change this current banking system, we are assured of continued poverty. We are assured of continued inequality and unemployment, because these are the generators of capital, which is supposed to be used for starting businesses. So I outlined, therefore, how public banks can be formed in South Africa and a particular model that can be adopted. And explained how industrialization has been frustrated in this country because of the banking system. You hear, I told them, that you're talking about savings. There are no savings in this country, therefore we have to import money from overseas in the form of FDI. I told them it's unnecessary. It's a joke to have meetings calling for foreign investors to come and invest in this country, just because you claim we don't have savings. The notion that savings are there for investment is a dead notion. It's part of the economics that is dead, that continues to ruin this country. And I told them, when you have a banking system, a public banking system, at the municipal level, municipalities, at provincial level, provincial government, and at national level, you will be able to change the dynamics in this country in the manner never understood or never seen before. I once again informed them of countries in Europe, including Germany, and how the UK itself developed, how France developed, how Italy developed, using these public banks, and how Japan developed, how South Korea developed. Money did not have to come from the treasury of South Korea. Money did not have to come from the treasury of Japan or even China itself for industrial development. It had to come from banks. But again, as I mentioned, Comrade Carr, that what we are taught at school is that banks are financial Yet there's a theory, the third one which I didn't mention, which simply says banks are not intermediaries, banks are not creators, are not firms, they're institutions, and therefore can create any investment amount that you want. Even one single bank in this country can serve the entire country correctly for as long as able to have people coming to it to ask for money, full stop. But since there's so much racism in the system, even these banks which have so many African people as their CEOs and so on, the mechanism does not work. It's not intended to serve the Black community. And we don't have the Black community, you don't have Black banks here. So I outlined all these issues to the Treasury. And, you would be shocked what I was taught when I was there is this is a public platform. I know some people may say, oh, well, you don't have to say it, but here it was. They were asking me about, who is financing my research. Instead of asking me the technical details of how we can put together a banking system in this country, how it should be designed, nothing at all came from that meeting. So I realized then I was talking to a set of people who had chosen either to ignore, written extensively in some of these things that are posted on Twitter and elsewhere around the banking system, the financial system as a whole, but macroeconomics generally, because there's no way, scholars here who are sitting here, there's no way a person would call them a competent economist when they don't understand money and banking. It's at the core of macroeconomics. That's the very reason some of us had to write articles that were not very present to the Reserve Bank, because we understood that what the Reserve Bank is doing is completely nonsense for macroeconomic purposes that would support this country. And that what the Treasury is doing is unhelpful. Now, we have political principles some of us are we have been party members and so on and so forth, who also understand our position and who are not new to the fact that we've been trying to promote a banking system that is capable of serving this country from an industrial perspective, as well as from supporting the Black lives that are so devastated by the banking system itself and the apartheid system that the banks continue to practice. Thanks.
Thank you, Reg. And I must say, sad as it is, I'm not surprised by the response that you received from those senior officials in the Department of Finance and the Treasury. I think the answer is very clear. They have a particular job to carry out as a captured group of people. Their intention is not to transform our economy, but to maintain the status quo and to be at the service of the big white monopoly capital companies. Tebu, do you want to come in shortly? I'm giving you an opportunity because I'm worried that you may be kicked out once again, and I don't know at which point we will no longer be able to bring you back in. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Comrade Carl. I just wanted to really, in response to what the very pertinent and detailed presentation by the economist Regge Nkosi, to say maybe the words of Henry Ford came to mind, because Henry Ford once said that it is well enough that people of the nation, and in this case, the nation of South Africa, do not understand our banking and monetary system. For if they did, and this was Henry Ford, and I too share that, I believe that there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. And I think our now is how are we going to, each and every one of us on this Twitter space tonight, ensure that this very detailed presentation by Regge Nkosi is made available to as many people, that we start to teach as many people as possible to understand the banking and the monetary system of this country, so that indeed the revolution can come. Because if we have 95%, some years ago I wrote that 92% of the money supply was actually in the hands of the private banks, and now with the research that Regge Nkosi did, that is 95%. That tells you everything. And that tells you that indeed there will be a revolution, because you cannot have a few banks that would control money supply to the detriment and to the pain and suffering of the majority, and still have a thriving economy, a country that is stable. So thank you very much, Reg, for that detail. But I think it is important that we should really ensure that as many people as possible understand banking and money, so that indeed we can free ourselves from this evil of the banking mafia, who really, they are hell-bent. And as I say, we have to give up on the politics and the politicians unless they prove us otherwise. But right now, let's not rely on any of the 400 people in parliament. They failed us, and failed us spectacularly. Thank you.
Thank you, Tepu. And I think the point that you make, that we need to understand the banking system and mobilize around that understanding of how fundamentally unequal and unjust it is part of the whole campaign that we need to work for, to get but out there in the streets and directly in their interactions with our banks. I'm now going to give an opportunity to Tawinsu to come in. You've been waiting for a very long time. Welcome, the mic is yours.
Good evening again, Mr. Carl. I think I have spoken just before Reggie came in.
My apologies if I ask you again, then perhaps we should give someone else an opportunity to give as many people as possible an opportunity. Thank you.
Just that you did not comment, or Mr. Tepo, on what I said.
Yes. You have muted. Please continue speaking. You wanted to say something. Please proceed.
Yes, I did say that as a young man who just started working, I was looking for a loan and I went to a bank. When I got to a bank, I'm a public servant. Got to a bank and I needed money. I borrowed money, and there I was given a 27% interest. And I've been asking them, why so much interest? Because I'm not a fugitive and I will be working. I'm young, healthy, and I'll be working for a long time. It's not like tomorrow that this job will be over. So I'll be working for a long time. Why must I be paying 27% to a bank? And it's not like I'm a first-time creditor. So that's how it is. And we went to a bank with some white guy. He was asking for the same amount of money, my peer, and he was given a 7% interest. He's not working. Well, he was working for a private company and had no properties whatsoever on his name, just like me.
Well, there we have a real life experience of what our banks do and the racial profiling that take place. Victor Scott, I see you wanted to speak. You've got the mic.
Good evening, folks. I just wanted to comment on a couple of historical perspective, where we are, or where we came from, and some of the blind sides that we have, and the interest and some people of where we are in South Africa. Prior to to the adoption of the constitution, or prior to the negotiation of the constitution, Ramaphosa was a leader in that negotiations, also by Thabo Mbeki. And prior to those negotiations that took place in Zambia, there were a lot of concessions that were made, and they were made not to be written down, because they were on their own merit, would constitute a revolution, a big uprising. And hence, people that try and do negotiation, or rather research, their PhDs on economics, on what was the impacts or the effects of the negotiations and the concessions that the ANC gave to the white minority rule, they are not written anywhere. And they all tell you it was a handshake deal. And those concessions, we see them currently as they emanate with the policies of the National Treasury, of the Reserve Banks, and they're implementing those concessions that were given politically to the white minority rule, to enforce, as the capitalists say, the property rights and the financials and the property rights and the assets that they currently hold, and to continuation of the monopoly structure of the economy, where we have monopolies everywhere and duopolies everywhere we look. And they know this. And it's apparent. You can't do, you cannot be blind to it. After 20, 30 years, you can see the consistent pattern of voting and the persistent action in parliament. Ramaphosa, even if any senior leader of the NEC or the top six will come to any conference at the last minute and change resolutions and undermine any resolution that was made. I mean, it's a litany of failure of more than 4 or 5. I mean, Carl, you probably know more how many implemented policies that ANC is supposed to have implemented in their conferences, and they have failed miserably. Less than 10% of those are ever implemented. And it's an indictment of where the ANC is. And you ask yourself, as any South African will tell you, you know, I want to keep my status quo, my living standards, and what have you. If you change the status of where the economic is, I'm going to go hungry. And as the situation is, the policies are forcing you hungry, losing jobs. And the crime is indictment of the policies that are being pushed through from the National Treasury. And it's a political indictment, because there is the National Treasury is implementing the concessions that were made in Zambia. And you know very well that when you go to a policy conference in there, nothing is 0% of those policies will be implemented. And to even get an action plan out of it is a dismal failure. And there you ask yourself, why should we, a person even ask yourself, why must we respect an organization that actually portrays its own individual person, its individual citizens, people that it was fundamentally created for, to ensure property rights and give land to the poor? It can't do that. Even housing is a failure. Same policies implemented and failed consistently being implemented. And the ANC again is going to elect Ramaphosa and his cahoots, and the banks and the telecommunication industry will again contribute to the coffers of ANC to make sure that they win the election and maintain the status quo. I mean, and if anybody doesn't see this, the only people of the self-interest is the people that have shares in the economy And there are billionaires that to maintain the status quo. We can't continue. And anybody that comes to the stage and says otherwise, that has been in an ANC, lacks moral fiber, or the hypocrisy of it is just damning. But anyway, I end it there. But the sad thing about it is that the future of every child in South Africa depends on the policies are depending on the Treasury. And the Treasury dictates what policy, not even the Treasury, the finance minister dictates the policy, what the Reserve Bank should do in terms of loan provisions, making sure the system is up, and how to transform the society. And it's not doing that. And it's the whole South African future, the economy. We'll have 3-4 generations who have never had a job in their lives and who have never had apprenticeships or anything of that sort because of the finance minister. When the finance minister is appointed by who? By the ANC president, who themselves are blockers of implementation of policies. It is revolutionary. What you're asking the South African person to do is very revolutionary, and it needs money, and you are fighting a system that is a corporate led by South African corporates, and the ANC is part of that. And to run an election is cost more than R1 billion, and not once has any South African citizens of Black, indigenous folks contributed to those elections. The majority is of white corporates. And clearly the policies are not aligned to the well-being of South Africans, of the citizens, of the young people in South Africa. I ended there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Victor. I think you refer to a meeting that took place in Zambia before the African National Congress was unbanned, where there was discussions with the big monopoly companies in South Africa. Victor, can you please mute your mic? Thank you. And there's a very interesting conversation that I had recently in an interview with Professor Chris Malekani. It is still on my YouTube channel in my crosshairs. The discussions are called Mpangazita in Conversation. And I would like to urge those of you who are listening to this Twitter Spaces platform to also go to that YouTube channel to watch and listen to that conversation where Professor Malekani refers to that particular meeting and the concessions that were made prior to the negotiating process even having started. And he quotes Ronnie Casuals and others who say, yes, there were concessions made and there were indications given to Anglo-American and some of the other big white monopoly companies in South Africa that the fundamentals of the economic system and the control of white monopoly capitalism over our economy will not be challenged. Very disturbing stuff. And processes that happened on a long-term basis, long before we even started the negotiating process. I now want to hand over to Isa Piri, who has requested for the mic. Isa, the mic is yours. Okay, Isa, can you please speak? You must unmute your mic before you speak. Please, you've muted it again. I'm still waiting for Isa to unmute his mic to speak. If he doesn't do so, I'm going to give to Mabhumwa to speak. The mic is yours.
Okay. No,
My
thank you.
apologies for the pronunciation. Please forgive me.
Okay, yes, no, it's Mabuma, yeah, no, thank you, Uncle Carl.
No, I think a lot of things that the previous speakers have spoken about, they hit the nail. Land expropriation without compensation, the one that failed in the parliament, the one that the ANC was given a mandate in Nasrec to go and pass it, was amended, and it became something else, from what it was initially tabled by the EFF. And the banks, I understand that they will have noticed that this will affect them, financially, if it was passed the way it was proposed. So, and it's an irony that property rights were used, in as an excuse in amending this thing the way it is. So it gave me a question to say, but then now, if branches gave this mandate to the leadership and realizing that this thing takes a different route, what did they do? Why were they not angry? Did they understand what they were asking for? So this whole thing now of this excuse of this property right is the one that now we find ourselves having to pay between 20 to 30 years paying a bond, to the bank. At times, even if you fail 3 months in succession, then they will then give it to somebody else. Then that 30 years again start again. So it's a space that we're not even looking at regulating in a way that it becomes fair. So we feed into this capitalism system. Capitalism is unstable, it's undemocratic, it's unethical. But then we find ourselves now feeding this into this system. And when maybe we need to look at the issue of infiltration by these private companies, because they try, when they give you something, it's not for nothing. It's absolutely something that they want to protect in terms of the policy. And it's not only these private companies that does this. We also do find that sometimes, if you've aligned yourself with the wrong countries, then you won't be able to implement your policies freely, because we've aligned ourselves with the West. Those people, they don't like us. I mean, the whole continent is suffering from the same thing. They don't own the land. We don't own the land. And this is because of these people. They try, they've got their CIA, they do whatever it takes. We won't even understand as an ordinary people what is going on. So we must zoom into this thing so that we are able to see how can we actually beat the system, because it's so sophisticated and it's so difficult. And now, if we are saying now black people must unite, we still have an issue, in Africa where leaders don't want to be led, because we need, China deals with issues of corruption and those people who takes money, to look the other way in terms of the policy or speak different languages. It deals with them very harshly, and for the reason because it knows that this thing defeats the very same purpose of, the very hope that the people have on the systems that we have in our democratic dispensation. So we definitely need to find a way, because I know that sometimes when you tell, when you say to the people now, certain parties are aligned to the original, what you call of the Freedom Charter, and then others, you could see that they push you away, from those what you call, and you are kind of labeled as someone who's maybe perhaps one party or what. So we need to find a way of accommodating our systems in such a way that we are able to go forward as a country. No, thank you, Uncle Carl. I see it's late, so I'm trying to cut.
Thank you so much, and thanks for those points, and also thanks for pointing out how the international links are there in terms of maintaining the system and avoiding the people from being able to take control of their lives. I'm now asking Rotondwa Makesha to join us. The mic is yours. Rotonda, can you please unmute your mic? Otherwise, we're not going to be able to hear you. There you are. You have unmuted it. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. Let's proceed. I want to hear what you have to share with us.
Okay. My issue is regarding this issue of the banking, but I will start here. I was watching that case of AfriForum against versus Malema. So Malema once said something about revolution. That revolution, he thinks revolution is better when we fought for, not you have settled for it. He was simply meaning that if during that time of apartheid, maybe if the ANC government has not reached a settlement, maybe we could not be here today. In terms of inequality, maybe if we have fought and win our own government, set our own rule without any compromise. Because today, a good example is our constitution. As I'm speaking now, by profession, I've studied law. So I understand what I'm saying. There are many ways that the constitution that we have, doesn't truly reflect the demographic of this country in terms of the equality and the needs that these people, they need at the moment. So this even gives power the banks. Carl?
We can hear you. Please proceed. I can hear a phone ringing in the
Hello?
background. Perhaps you should put it off.
Mr. Carl?
Yes, we can hear you. Please proceed.
So, sorry about that. I was saying, if you look at how the bank operates today, all these things, they are related. Because currently, the power vested before the National Treasury and the current government, in some way, they are able to protect themselves to say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, the constitution doesn't allow us to do this, doesn't allow us to do this. But if we have to face the reality, under Mbeki, the ANC government managed to get 75%, whereby they could have managed to amend whatever they feel it was a compromise between the apartheid government and the current government. But they didn't do that. Then we must ask ourselves, why didn't they utilize that opportunity? It's because among themselves, there are people who are benefiting from these monopoly capitalists, if we can put it that way. And then today, if somebody talks about radical economic transformation, they accuse us of saying maybe we are supporting the looting, the theft, all those things. But those are the policies of the ANC. What they do, they will say this can be implemented because now the government doesn't have money, all those things. But the government is in the right place to say, okay, even if we don't have money, but we can implement this policy and then we see how far it takes us. So that on its own. Another good example is now as we speak, before Titombo when he left, he talked about the National Bank. Even today they talk about National Bank. That is very simple thing. But they can't talk about National Bank because they can't even talk about nationalizing the Reserve Bank. Because their interest is there. Thank you, Mr. Carl.
Thank you so much. I'm going to give the mic to X-Man, who is requested to speak. X-Man, the mic is yours. I see a number of speakers who have requested to speak have fallen off. It seems to me that the system throws people out. Those of you who still want to speak, please request again. I will allow you back. X-Man, I'm handing over to you. X-Man, can you please unmute your mic? Otherwise, we will not be able to hear you if you speak.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Comrade Carl. And Tsepo and the rest of the listeners. You see, Comrade Carl, I have high respect for you, you know, because you are a very honest and consistent comrade. You have now come with this space. Please don't leave this space. Go with this space forever. But the Communal Carl, my question, my concern is, we need to form a strategy. Number one, to remove this president. That this president is not a good guy. If you take it from Codesa, he's the guy who messed the black people. He's the guy who created where we are today. He's the guy when he say, go to Marikana and do whatever, and people dies. He's the guy who has made racist to show our head. He is the guy who created Askari in number after Zuma. So Palapala must not go away. Marikana must not go away. Glencoe must not go away. We have to come up with a strategy that take this guy within his first term out. If you go to Togoza and Gatlehong, our generation are poor. And you can see these guys, they will never get the job. If you go to Soweto, you see poverty. But the guy is moving dollars during COVID. Is going around in COVID with his handlers. I don't know who were there or with him during COVID, and he tell us to sit in the what you call in the house. Now we found that the guy was busy moving dollars, doing money laundering, kidnapping, committing crime. What a kind of president is that? What a kind of president is that? Really? So, to me, we have to come with a strategy that remove these guys like yesterday. So, I remember the time when Zuma was trying to make the poverty go away. Obviously, in this space, there are scary, there are sellouts, there are racist in this what do you call it space. I don't care, but I'm telling the fact that Zuma was taking this country back to the black people who were disadvantaged, disenfranchised. Because the Askari were so much that they were so powerful. But I blame you, Comrade Carl, you guys, you should have told the guy to say, hey, don't play now. The Askari is too much in the ANC. They have gone in, they have done what they have done. Guy like Tsepo, how do you remove the guy who take coal like in a wheelbarrow, and you don't want him to be involved in that situation? How do you take out the guy like Coco with the brains of managing ESCOM? How do you take out the guy with like Brian Mlife, who is the administration that takes, because those guys stop load shedding. But because we have this president who is so glued to this white monopoly capital, he felt that he rather give everything to Glencore so that we have got load shedding. In Soweto, there's load reduction. I don't know what they mean about load reduction. In Katlehong, there's load reduction. I'm sure in KZN, they have another load reduction. I'm sure in Limpopo, they have got another load reduction. So they just have this racist load reduction. It just makes me sick every day. But we have to come out with a strategy to remove the guy. The guy has done more damage. The other thing, we have got this finance minister, is Trevor, is Kapal Godan, even Godongwan. These guys are captured. We need ANC back, the real ANC Katambo. We need those guys back. These finance ministers are captured. Number two, you have a situation where the bank is playing racist card all over. I heard when Nkosi was talking, I just listened to him. I said to myself, because I was busy with another meeting, but at the same time I was listening to you, that the bank will have a 20%, 20 people applying, but one will get an appointment or we are black. 20 black people applying for the loan, but you will have only one. It's true. The bank have captured the Reserve Bank. Or the bank is either the bank are playing a racist card. If we had a president who is stronger like Jay-Z, that thing will not have happened. Carl, that thing will never have happened. Jay-Z put us to bricks. We have a puppet president today who doesn't talk about bricks, who just go and hide dollars under his mattress. Yeah? Oh, please, man. Guys, let's be normal.
I think your point is very well made, Comrade X-Man. So probably what we are trying to say is, well, what do we do next and where do we go? And whilst I'm there, I just wanted to highlight to the listeners that the account which Regge Nkosi joined in is his son's account, but it was created temporarily to be able to participate in this space tonight following the mishap with his own account. So if you wish to follow him on Twitter, his handle is at Regge Nkosi, at REDGE Nkosi. That's the Twitter handle for Regge Nkosi. So we just want to bring that to your attention, the listeners that have been following, because the Kucho account that is currently connected on is going to be disabled at the end of this Twitter space. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. But I think maybe for the sake of progress, let's try and see, well, how do we go to, where do we go from here? Comrade Carl?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
X-Men, I think you must wind up because the points that you are making are very valid, but you are beginning to repeat yourself. So can you please wind up, or can we presume that we can move on to the next speaker, or do you just want to make your final concluding remarks?
No, I want to make my final concluding remark, Comrade Carl. I think we need to come up like Afro Forum, okay? We need to move and have a strategy how we attack the white monopoly capital, including their puppets. We need to go that, okay? We need to go that route if we don't remove these guys, the generation to come has got no future. I can guarantee you, the generation that are coming have no future. Thank you, Comrade Carl.
Thank you, X-Man. And I think the point that you made, that President Ramaphosa has to go, and what happened around the Palapala farm issue has to be addressed, and it cannot be allowed to slip away from the public consciousness. At the end of this Twitter Spaces, we are going to present a strategy that have been worked out by a number of comrades on how we believe members of the African National Congress, but also in general, members of the public can mobilize. That strategy is in the form of a toolkit, which I've already posted on my Twitter account, but I invite you at the end to stay and continue to be linked to this Twitter Spaces, while a recording will be played where the strategy is extrapolated on and where you are given the tools on how to move forward with mobilization, so that we are not just talking, but we're actually getting ourselves out on the street. We're actually going out there, we mobilize, and we make sure that those who have committed those crimes and who have in the long term been captured by white monopoly capitalism are removed. I see that Comrade Nkosi Shezi has requested to speak, and I want to give the mic to him.
But before you speak, Comrade Carl, if there is money to be paid, let's pay the money. Okay. Thank you.
No, greetings, Comrade Carl.
We can hear you, Comrade Shezi. You can proceed. My apologies for speaking over.
Thank you very much, Comrade Carl. Greetings to you and your fellow co-host, the listeners and speakers who are on the space. And I just want to make a few comments, Comrade Carl. I'm covered in terms of the deliberations that are taking place around the topic of the day, which is very fundamental and important. And I want to say that I truly believe that we need to do something about these racist banks. The matter of Palapala Farm and the saga that's around it, in terms of the number of contraventions of the law that has taken place, the FICA Act, and many, the foreign exchange and what have you. If we had banks that are honest in their dealings, that sees every South African as a South African without really choosing a particular side of the divide of our society, Cyril Ramaphosa's bank's accounts should have been closed by now. Nonetheless, I said I don't intend to be long. You have partly covered me on the last bits, Comrade Carl, of your presentation about the toolkits that you have developed that is going to see us out of this quagmire that we're facing. Because I believe that no matter how we look at many problems that are confronting our people today, the answer will be one. The answer will be the Cyril Ramaphosa regime must go. If you want to solve the problem of load shedding, we already have an example that there are people, men and women of this country, who have all the necessary requisite skills to manage that facility to give us electricity at a good price. And where did it go wrong? It is Cyril Ramaphosa. If you look at, I can count a number of things. Cyril Ramaphosa has to go, and therefore, my contribution would be to follow up on the presentation, a very long presentation, and unfortunately, I'm sorry, let me not pass a judgment, but to say that thank you very much for allowing the last speaker to make such a long presentation, which is not necessarily in line, talking into the banks as the topic of today is outlining. But I think it was critical and necessary for him to raise a number of things that he raised, because ours is to make sure that for us to be able to correct all these ills that are happening around the financial sector is to remove Cyril Ramaphosa, so that we get leaders within the ANC or we get leaders into parliament that are going to care about the people of this country. We do have an example of a president who once attempted to bring down the white monopoly capital. So we need that kind of caliber. And now that we know things that we did not know in the past, we are going to remove Cyril Ramaphosa, replace him with a credible leader, and we're not going to leave him to lead alone. We are going to make sure that we support him, we guide him, we make sure that our revolution is intact at all material point in time. And therefore, that was my contribution, Comrade Carl, to say that I am 100% pleased with the toolkit. I am, if at all, I am going to see to it, and we should be looking at ways and means of getting that toolkit into different number of languages, South African languages, your Soto, isiZulu, Xhosa, so that ordinary men and women of this country knows and understand that all our problems begin with Cyril Ramaphosa as president of this country, and the fundamental step to correct them is to get Cyril Ramaphosa out of the presidents of the ANC, ultimately out of the presidency of the country, because he is corrupt, because he has contravened the rules and regulations and laws of this country. And therefore, that's very important that we take that route. Thank you very much for allowing me to be off topic as well. But I think it is necessary that we understand that whenever we gather as Black people, we want our land, we want financial freedom, and our problem is Cyril Ramaphosa. Thank you very much, host and co-host.
Thank you, Comrade Shezi. And no, you were not off topic. In fact, you're very much on topic, because at the end of the day, we need to move in terms of practical measures on how to address the challenges we are faced with. And Cyril Ramaphosa is certainly a manifestation of those problems. And as you correctly say, without him going, a lot of the issues that we want to address, including also the problem of the capture of the South African financial system, of our Department of Finance and Treasury, and our banking system, will never move forward. I'm going to allow only the people who I've now allowed in to have an opportunity to speak. Those are 5 people, because we are beginning to run out of time. I notice that there are others who have also requested to speak. You will get an opportunity to talk on this subject at a different time, because remember at the beginning I mentioned that Iqbal Survey was not able to participate in this conversation, and at the same time Emerald van Zyl, unfortunately, was not able to join. In a week or two's time, we will create the opportunity of another Twitter space where you will get the opportunity to participate with those 2 participants as hosts, as guests, and they will be able to talk from a personal experience of what they have suffered at the hands of our racist banks. I'm now handing over to Mugabe Ivan, who has requested for quite some time to speak. The mic is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. A very important topic which we also need really to address this time around, the issue of institutional racism. I mean, banks are financial institutions, but what we appreciate at the moment is that they are working within an institutionalized racism sort of environment. And I think what at the moment we clearly see is that this is denying it's denying because of racism, it's clearly denying access to certain banking facilities. And so there is lack of financial authority, there is lack of financial inclusion, and that is clearly institutionalized in the system, which is being used to actually award the loan schemes. And I think at the moment, we first of all have to agree that there is a problem, surely, and not only agree where the problem is, but illustrate, demonstrate the magnitude of that problem. And I think in the long run, we also definitely demand, and we definitely have to ask for policies which will enhance, facilitate, enable, support inclusion, and of course here we are looking at a system where, for example, a blind loaning applications, if people are asking for loans, at the moment, what is probably happening, names are being used to identify and exclude certain individuals, because the name can be used to know whether you are an African, or it can be used to know that this one is black, this one is not. So these are things which are implicitly and indirectly, and the earlier honorable has already given us example. 20 people apply and very few numbers are being given opportunity. And I think we need, to think about positive measures. For example, banks and institutions which are willing to award, loans in an inclusive, racially inclusive manner. I think they should at least be identified, and where possible, maybe those banks, they may be looking at a possibility of giving them tax holidays. So there must be some sort of special measures given where really there are banks who are willing. And if there is none, then it should also be made public. But also things like boycotts. If a bank, can be identified and can be exposed repeatedly, excluding, carrying out what we call institutional banking racism, it should be boycotted, naming and shaming, not only named but exposed. And I think there is still demand to ensure that there are laws which can strengthen, strengthening the laws which are reprimanding or even cancelling banking licenses, where it's clear that some of these, banks are openly and deliberately excluding, financial inclusion, or actually denying financial inclusion. So there is probably also, we still have to demand for racially diverse banking policy, especially in the human resource department, so that I think banking decisions are also made by all people in South Africa, not only, in terms of employment, so that, we are very sure that our people are within the banking system. They are part of the decision-making board. They are part of the, the key corporate structures of the banking industry. That will, in a way, create diversity, but also create room for further inclusion of everyone and everybody, in as far as how issues of banking systems are being done. Other than that, because we have seen there are countries where this problem has happened, the problem of institutional racism, and it has been addressed, and of course, in the long run, efforts are done. But again, I need to emphasize, like the earlier presenters have mentioned, where the system fails to address the problem, then the system has to be completely overturned, and then a new regime, a new system comes on ground to resolve, respond, and listen to these issues, because a more proactive approach is needed than merely an inactive or a dormant model, which is not at the moment addressing the problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Sandile Shangase to take the mic. Sandile, the mic is yours. If you are speaking, can you please unmute your mic? Because I can see your mic is muted. We don't hear a thing from you. Okay, since Sandile is not unmuting his mic, I'm going to ask Madume C to come in. The mic is yours, Madume.
Good evening, Comrade Carl, Comrade Kadima, and comrades. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Perhaps you can raise your voice a little bit, but yes, we can hear you. Please try to talk a little bit louder.
Hey, there's no sharing here, Comrade Carl, and I think I should just hand it over to other speakers. I'll have an opportunity next time. Thank you.
Comrades, please try. We can hear you. Just keep it short so that we can move to the next speaker. Please, Madume.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that there's an outage just now, so my signal is too low. Let me just hand it over to other cadres.
I'm allowing Madume to leave us because of the load shedding, and I'm handing over to Mongezi Balotu. Mongezi?
Thank you, Uncle Carl. Mine is very short, about racism and the banks. I just wanted to point out that another index of racism or discrimination in the banks is the language factor. Banks are practicing what is called institutionalized linguicism. No indigenous languages are used as written language, and not also in paper or not in the digital space. The majority of our people, now this is barring the majority of our people, that means they cannot enter the economic arena as themselves in their languages. And this is, this is not only in the banks. This also happens in government institutions and government enterprises, and even in political organizations. As a linguist, my dissertation is on the use of languages in the banks. And, though our government has policies that advocate for linguistic pluralism, like one of those that Comrade Jay-Z assented in 2014, the Use of Official Languages Act of 2012, which seems to be ignored, whether in government or outside, because organizations like the Pan South African Language Board, the CRL Commission, and are just toothless watchdogs, and such racism is, such linguicism is equal to racism. And so I want to suggest that as part of banking transformation and what they call the idea of the national bank that we've had so far is that the bank needs to be linguistic friendly so that we can talk to our people. It can directly invite people to be able to enter the economic arena, because part of the big problem is that we get into these banks and they are only aligned with English and Afrikaans, and that leaves out a lot of banking information and fiscal epistemology that people need to know about entering the spaces like this. So mine was just to bring up that the language factor must never be left out when we discuss racism, as Comrade Nkosi also suggested about the translation of the documentation that we have as the way forward here, that we need to start to speak to the people in the languages of the people. Thank you very much, Comrade Carl.
Thank you, Mongezi, and thanks for a very critical point that you raise. Yes, our banks speak in English to our people. They exclude them. They don't just exclude them financially. They make it impossible in many instances for people to fully participate and understand, and it's deliberately that they do so. I now hand over to Gravano, who's requested to speak. The mic is yours.
Good evening, everyone. I'm not going to talk about racism.
Your sound is very muffled. Can you try to speak a little bit louder so that we can hear you? Please.
Sorry, everyone. I was connected to my earphones. I said good evening, and I'm not gonna talk about racism in banks. I just wanna comment on something I've heard like a lot of speakers say about removing the president from chair and replacing them with a credible leader. And I just wanted to ask, like, how many times would we do that as a nation, with removing the president and finding someone who's credible to lead us? Like, we thought Cyril was a good leader, replacing Zuma with him, and it clearly didn't work out. And I just feel like as a nation, we are so caught up in what the media feeds us. We want to know, what are we going to do as a nation? Like, instead of doing our own research, it's always about like finding out from the next person. And I just feel like doing that, we don't really get real information, like, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm like explaining myself properly, but I just feel like this thing of removing the president from chair and finding another leader just doesn't work for us. We need to find other ways to tackle what is going on in our nation. And yeah, thank you.
Gravano, thank you. I hear your disappointment with Cyril Ramaphosa. I was interested in an article that recently was published in News 24 by Carol Payton, where she said, "We thought you were a good guy. You showed us a mask. Now your mask has fallen off. And I understand your concern that it's not just simply about replacing the leader, but about putting a system in place that will be representative of the people, will be democratic, and will be responsive to the needs of the people. I think that is also what Comrade Chesi was talking about when he was talking about a system where we don't just appoint a leader, but make sure that that leader is integrated into a full and responsive and democratic and accountable process of leadership. I'm going to allow only 2 more speakers because we are now at 10 to 8. And the next speaker that I'm calling in is Nkateku Shipalana, who has requested the mic. The mic is yours.
Thank you. I really am appreciative of this conversation. What is truly frustrating, though, is a continuation of trying to find only political solutions to the problem that we're talking about. I mean, the political solution that is being discussed is going to happen in 6 months, and we don't even know who this credible leader who's going to come in looks like, what they look like, you know, what they believe in, what the policies that they want to implement are, etc., etc. So a lot of the frustration that comes from, you know, the everyday South African, the business owner, etc., is that there are everyday costs that, you know, need to be taken care of. There's the running of businesses, there's the issue of ensuring that, you know, your business continues to run, you are able to pay salaries, etc., etc. I think what would have been extremely useful is in the very many people who are participating in this spaces conversation is to really call out those people who work in those banks, because the banks are not like some, you know, abstract you know, white monopoly capital machine that does not have people. The very people who are on this talk work for those banks. They need to at least assist, you know, the rest of the participants here, try to understand what is it that sort of leads. I remember the other speaker was talking, you know, getting a 25% interest rate, whereas their, you know, white counterpart got 7. What is it about the decision making that gets us to those type of outcomes? You can't tell me that there is no one in this talk who is incapable of giving a practical solution so that tomorrow when we wake up, we say, oh, I know what to do next. We can't wait, you know, all the time for political solutions. You know, it was make it to be replaced by Zuma. I mean, like, just, you know, referring to the previous speaker, it was Zuma being replaced by, you know, so and so. And yes, we need political solutions to a lot of these things. The ANC needs to obviously get it together and ensure that, you know, these political solutions are implemented, or whoever is in power, make sure that these political solutions are implemented. But surely we can come up with a practical solution for implementing tomorrow to help the business owner in a conversation that involves 900 people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The last speaker that we're going to have before I hand over to Tsepo Khadima to give us a round up of the discussion. And also, Tsepo, I'm warning you so that you can let your mind go, also some suggestions on how we move forward. And then after Tsepo has done that, I will then make a couple of remarks about the upcoming Twitter spaces that we're going to have. And then we will proceed to present that toolkit for change and for transformation and for addressing the issue of getting rid of Cyril Ramaphosa and those around him, also in the context of the Palapala farm. I'm now handing over as our last speaker of tonight, last participant, Kutsu, before Tsepo will then come in and summarize our discussion. Kutsu, the mic is yours.
Sorry, it's Regge.
This
Yes.
problem of not being unmuting mics is still a problem. We must remember to do that. Kutsu, please proceed.
So, Kai, it's Regge Nkosi. You remember son's name. So maybe before Tsepo goes.
Kutsu, your connection is very bad. We are battling to hear you. Your connection is very bad. We're battling to hear you.
Okay. Kai, it's Regge Nkosi. It's Regge Nkosi.
Oh, it's Regge. Sorry, Regge.
Yes.
I get
Yes.
confused by you being under this pseudonym of yours. Then let's get one, before you speak, Regge, I'm going to give one more speaker a chance because I gave them an opportunity. And then, Regge, I'm going to allow you to speak and then hand over to Tsepo. I'm now asking Mpho to join us. Mpho, I've opened the mic for you. Okay, it seems that Mpho is Mpho is not there. So, Regge, I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak, and after that, then we're handing over to Tsepo. Please proceed.
Thanks very much, Kai, and Tsepo again. My closing remarks are really short. In 2007, 2008, when there was a financial crisis, countries went all out to defend their economies. South Africa was the one country that failed to support its economy. And as a consequence, we have never grown ever since 2009 to debt. And then we compounded our problem with the COVID situation. Now, Bangladesh, a least developed country, did the following. The governor of the Reserve Bank of Bangladesh told me personally, his name is Professor Atiur Rahman. Professor Atiur Rahman now is obviously no longer a governor because it's 15 years ago now, almost. He said he took money to the ground in bullock carts and ordered banks to support the textile industry, the SMMEs, at very low rates of interest. And Professor Atiur Rahman was eventually granted by the United Nations the title of a banker for the people. It shows how national interest in Bangladesh, a least developed country, which has now basically it's almost becoming a developing country, all right? How the Reserve Bank pushed its banks to support SMMEs, to support key productive sectors of the economy. Sadly, we've never had this. In South Africa, when you talk about this, they talk inflation, 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 and you tire listening to the word inflation. In Bangladesh, in 2007, 2008, the inflation was about 15%. The governor told me it was 12%. I checked statistically, looked around, clearly it was 15%. When he took money to the ground in bullock carts, as he puts it, inflation came down to 7% and up to 5%. So the notion that a reserve bank can take money to the ground will create inflation is nonsensical, as we've come to see here. Similarly, claims by our banking system that the Reserve Bank, shouldn't do this and that is absolutely nonsensical. It's because it's born out of ignorance or out of capture, simply, or just because they don't want the Reserve Bank and indeed the banking sector to assist the SMMEs and the Black people in particular. Now, this cannot be seen as a Black problem just because the banking system is racist. At the end of the day, the failure of this banking system to support SMEs and the black people will be a problem for the white community in this country, for the European community in this country. So this fight, therefore, cannot be one that should be left to the so-called blacks in this country, the Sekunjalos and so on. It can't. It's a fight that must be taken on by the European compatriots who are with us in this country as citizens. Because sooner or later, they will collapse with us all. So there cannot be any excuse. Therefore, structural reforms, if any at all in this country, must be those of the banking system. First and foremost, all this nonsense of structural reforms that have copied from the IMF and the World Bank, all that stuff is copied, by the way. I might have indicated that on my Twitter account and so on. There's nothing South African about it. It's all about dominating this country by foreign interests and the key elite interests. The real structural reforms we need here are the structural reforms of the banking system. There must be an institutional revolution. And unless that happens, the future for both black and white in this country is gone. Therefore, the laws as well must continue to change to mirror the changing nature of the banking system. And unless we collectively do that as a citizenry, the white community that think is sheltered by the banking system will sooner or later be in the very dungeons that the black community is finding itself now. Those are my closing remarks, Ka and Tsepo. Thanks very much. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Reg. And once again, very seminal remarks about the challenges that we face and the fundamental changes that we have to bring about. I'm now handing the mic over to Tsepo Gadima to give us a summary of the inputs and at the same time also to help us with some suggestions on how we move forward in terms of practical action to deal with our racist banking system. Tsepo, the mic is.
Thank you, Comrade Carl, and my gratitude to Regge Nkosi, who's one of the really sharpest minds in the economics kitchen, who is not fully appreciated. But I think let's hope that platforms such as this will ensure that his voice grows louder and louder, because that way our nation can be able to grow and be able to benefit from that. But really, it is clear in my mind from the inputs that have been made here tonight that we really have to have a two-pronged approach. There is what we can do immediately in terms of what already is unlawful conduct by the banks. So we need to encourage and educate as many people that when they receive a sheriff's note, that they need not be embarrassed nor be frightened into inaction, but that they actually need to resist and ask the hard questions, because for far too long, the banking mafia have had it too easy in terms of really violating the constitutional rights of citizens and dispossessing them of their hard-earned property. So that is the first thing, that there always has to be resisted, but it's only an informed citizenry that can resist. So beyond this Twitter space and its broadcasting, I think we need to do it more, because millions of South Africans are adversely affected and on a daily basis. It's a pity we didn't have Emerald van Zyl, but we encourage the listeners here to go to his Twitter handle and be able to find some of the evidence that he has uncovered, where many people have fallen victim to the illegal conduct of the banks, and therefore only an informed citizen can be able to resist. Secondly, I think the two-pronged approach will be that we again need to really have a much more deliberate, active teaching of the citizens about how banking and money functions, so that we can wrestle control from the private banks who would like to believe that they are firms, and as Regge eloquently put it, they are not. They're actually quasi-organs of state. They are institutions that are enjoined in duty to uphold the constitutional rights of citizens. But we need to wrestle control, and wrestling control from the banks, the banking mafia, whereby they control 95% of money supply, would be the nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank. And that goal is a goal that must be fought for until it is attained. If it means that it can only be attained in the year 2024 when we go to the next election, well, let it be. But between now and 2024, when there's elections, we need to now ensure that as citizens, we are asking all political parties for them to earn a right to be elected or have any of their members elected to parliament. This must be the issue that they prioritize, because I have written extensively on why it would cost no more than 55 million rand to nationalize the South African Reserve Bank. And I have challenged, and I continue to challenge anyone at National Treasury, anyone at the Reserve Bank, to show us why it needs to cost more than 55 million rand to nationalize the South African Reserve Bank. That must be the goal that we must fight for. And we can only win that war to nationalize the South African Reserve Bank, and so that it can work for the people by ensuring that we have an informed, a conscientized, as well as a prepared society to ensure that, you know, the type of people that we put in parliament will be the people that care. The 400 people that are there right now, not a single one of them is for our good. And therefore, I think the cleanup, the Mrambatswina, has to be on parliament, not just on one person in terms of Cyril Ramaphosa or in terms of one political party, but it must be all of them, because all of them are enjoined in duty and they have failed us. Had they done their work as elected public representatives, we would not have been having this space tonight where we are lamenting the absolute violation of citizens' constitutional rights, rights which are so sacrosanct, that are fundamental in our constitution, and yet they are wantonly violated by this elite banking mafia, which must be destroyed, and it must be destroyed by all means necessary and lawful means. But if lawful means fails, well, it means that we are going to unfortunately find ourselves in self-help, which is anarchy. Those really are my remarks. But I think those are the two things that we need to do immediately, is for people to act in concert. If there is to be a class action, let there be a class action. We already have got lawyers, legal minds that can be able to assist, and perhaps maybe Comrade Carl, you can be able to coordinate that, so that people's rise, we can bring an immediate stop using the existing laws and call out our judiciary, which unfortunately has been found to be patently corrupt. Because if they were not corrupt, we would not have been having people's properties being dispossessed, and we would not have been having citizens being overcharged in terms of interest and discriminated in the manner that they are. If we had a judiciary that was loyal to the law and loyal to the rule of law, they are not loyal to the rule of law, and that can only mean that they have been corrupted. And perhaps maybe we need to look at, well, how do we remove a judiciary that is patently corrupt and being bribed to ensure that the citizens are suffering in the manner that they are. That's really my closing remarks based on what had been discussed and the discourse that happened here this evening.
Thank you so much, Sepu. And I think we all agree that we need to proceed with a broadened process of class action. We can use this platform as one of those legs of the action that needs to be taken. At the same time, we can look at the actions that have been undertaken already by various other parties who have legally challenged this racist banking system of ours, including also the actions that had been undertaken by the independent group, by IU, specifically by Dr. Iqbal Survey. As I've indicated earlier, we will provide in the foreseeable future a forum where Emerald van Zyl and Dr. Iqbal Survey can continue with this discussion, because I don't have a sense that we have actually totally concluded this discussion. There's still much more that needs to be said. Now I want to say a couple of things about the upcoming program that we are developing Can I just hear, because I don't see an indication that my mic is working. Tepo, can you indicate to me, is my mic working?
100%.
Thank you. The program that we are proceeding with in terms of coming Wednesday, that is the 15th of June, is what I think is going to be one of the most interesting Twitter spaces and in my crosshairs conversations that we can imagine. I've just received confirmation that our public protector, Usisiwe Mkhobane, Advocate Mkhobane, has agreed to join us at 7 o'clock on the 15th of June, on the evening at 7 o'clock, to discuss her work and also the reasons that she believes that President Ramaphosa has decided to suspend her. Some of you in your conversations here referred to the actions that President Ramaphosa had taken to suspend Advocate Mkhobane. And I don't think there's much doubt in the minds of most of us that that was a deliberate action in order to repress her and to prevent her from doing the legitimate investigation on the basis of complaints about Palapala that she has received. So I'm looking forward to have Advocate Mkhobane, our public protector, as our sole guest on Wednesday, the 15th of June at 7 o'clock in the evening. Then on Sunday, the 19th, in the late afternoon at 5 o'clock, we are going to discuss the issue of stepping aside, that vexed issue, the one that the Secretary General of the African National Congress, Comrade Ace Magashule, has referred to so strongly when he appeared last Friday in court, when he also addressed the court and the judge and said this issue is simply being used in order to prevent me from participating in the upcoming contestation for leadership of the African National Congress at its 55th National Elective Conference. I have invited two guests to join us for that conversation about stepping aside. Advocate Dali Mpofu and Comrade Tony Ngeni, who is a member of the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress and also a member of the National Working Committee of the African National Congress. I've received several requests from you that you want a discussion about stepping aside. So on Sunday, we will have that discussion. Let us now proceed to consider the toolkit that we have developed and that I've referred to earlier with regards to how to mobilize around the very critical issue of the criminal shenanigans that played out at Palapala, and how we believe it should be possible for us as a society, as a conscious community, to participate, to take action, and to ensure that President Ramaphosa can face the law, be kept accountable, and finally that he must resign as President of the African National Congress and as President of the country. Before I now going to play the recording of the toolkit that has been developed, and it's about 25 minutes long, so I ask you to have patience, but it is, I believe, a detailed and interesting toolkit for mobilization. I want to thank Tepo Khadima, my co-host, for always being one of the best people to summarize a discussion as wide-ranging as the one that we had tonight and to help to give us direction. I also want to thank Regge Nkosi, who, as Tepo said, is one of the most salient legal minds and minds in our economic understanding of the legality also of our banking system and the economics of our banking system. And we thank Regge for his participation. We also ask him to share with us some of those documents that he has indicated that he wrote to various senior officials of the Department of Finance and the Treasury. We need those documents. We want to know who those people are who are constantly putting obstacles in our route for full economic emancipation. I'm concluding by thanking each one of you as the participants in this conversation. Thank you for giving your time. Thank you for showing your commitment by participating and making the invaluable inputs that you've made. Let us now proceed to consider the toolkit of how we are going to mobilize to deal with President Cyril Ramaphosa and the rest of those criminals who surrounded him in terms of the shenanigans that took place at the Palapala farm. I will proceed to play this recording, and at the end of the recording, we will then end this Twitter Spaces conversation. Once again, thank you for being part of this conversation.
Good day. This is Niehaus, and this is an audio recording of a document that we've developed as a tool for mobilization under the title, What Did Ramaphosa Do? The intention of this recording is on the basis of the document to provide a short summary of the events that played itself out on the Palapala farm of President Cyril Ramaphosa since the 9th of February 2020 and all the other criminal shenanigans that happened since. It is based on the detailed affidavit and supporting documents that Arthur Fraser provided when he laid criminal charges of theft, fraud, money laundering, abduction and torture against President Cyril Ramaphosa and other persons. First of all, we're going to look at the historical sequence of events, and then we will go over to a consideration of what Ramaphosa did, why Ramaphosa covered up the farm burglary, and what urgent actions are necessary in the light of this very serious situation. The robbers gained access into the Palapala farm on the 9th of February 2020 at 10:17 p.m. by cutting the wire perimeter fencing. They gained entry into the farmhouse through a window on the ground floor and found millions of United States dollars hidden in various pieces of furniture throughout the farm residence. They then proceeded to steal all this illicit money. Upon discovery of the burglary, staff members were interviewed, and to call it interviews is an euphemism because they were rudely interrogated and tortured. A domestic worker was initially dismissed following her interrogation, but she was later reinstated after her father had a conversation with President Ramaphosa. It would be interesting to know what that conversation entailed. The robbers exchanged the stolen United States dollars at an informal foreign exchange service in Cape Town. And once they turned the dollars into rands, paid huge amounts of cash into their bank accounts, specifically First National Bank accounts. Strangely, I suppose also interestingly enough, FNB never raised a red flag about these huge and, in terms of our FICA legislation, illegal payments of huge amounts of cash into these bank accounts. The head of the Presidential Protection Unit, Major General Wally Ruede, who was involved in an illicit investigation into this robbery without having declared it formerly to the South African Police Service, received screenshots of text messages between a woman who knew both the suspects and the investigators dealing with attempts to trace the suspects. A number of transactions took place that made it possible to trace the robbers. So, for example, on the 14th of February 2020, one of the suspects bought a Ford Ranger wild track. A day later, on the 15th of February 2020, another suspect deposited no less than 715,000 rands from his bank account into that of a car dealership. This took place in two tranches of 300,000 and 450,000. As I've already indicated, strangely enough, First National Bank did not raise any red flags about these very, very suspicious transactions. A couple of days later, on the 19th of February 2020, a red Golf GTI was registered in the name of one of the suspects, once again bought with this money that had been robbed. So this is part of the historical sequence. And the document that we've developed is meant to provide for lawful public participation and engagement into our democracy, and to use our rights to organize politically and socially under the rule of law and respecting our hard-won democratic rights to do so. It aims to familiarize all of us as the public about the Palapala farm crimes that had been committed, about the human rights violations, and to enable anyone unfamiliar with the ongoing criminal complaint made against Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African Police Service Presidential Protection Unit, and others. The situation is as follows: that President Ramaphosa and some of his co-conspirators in these crimes that have been committed have made some very serious contraventions of the law, as per the criminal complaint made by Arthur Fraser, who is a former civil servant and deployed cadre. The President, Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa, as accused number one in the charges that have been laid, is accused of the following crimes. And I stipulate them because there are 14 of these crimes that can be identified, and arguably there can be more. But for now, let's stick with these 14. First of all, Ramaphosa breached his constitutional duty to protect all South Africans and its residents from unlawful actions by the state actors, in that he caused for his farm employees, including a woman, to become the direct victims of abduction, interrogation, and torture, illegal, to be deprived of their freedom of movement through false and unlawful imprisonment on his farm. Secondly, Ramaphosa employed the services of the South African Police Services Presidential Protection Unit to act in dark operations, to unlawfully interrogate and imprison at his farm and at other private locations the direct victims who he suspected of having stolen cash from his farm. And I must hasten to add, illicit cash, cash that had not been declared in contravention of the foreign exchange regulations of our country. 3, Ramaphosa had the South African Police Services Presidential Protection Unit conduct an unlawful rendition of victims from Namibia. In fact, he co-conspired with the president of Namibia, Dingo, to abduct a person who was in the boundaries of Namibia and illegally, without any proper
movement across the border from Namibia to South Africa bring that person back into South Africa. A serious international crime. 4. Ramaphosa had the direct victims bound, handcuffed, and interrogated for unknown periods at his farm. In fact, some of those interrogations took place inside the lounge of his farmhouse and other places by members of the South African Police Service, who were not acting in terms of a formal complaint that had been laid with the South African Police Service, because no such had been made, and were not responsible for investigations of crime or theft, but were responsible for his personal safety and the safety of his family. 5. Ramaphosa was in possession of hard hoards of cash in American dollars, which is against the domestic laws of our country. In fact, in direct contravention of the amended FICA legislation of 2017, which makes it illegal to have such huge amounts of foreign cash in one's possession. 6. Ramaphosa had not declared having this large amount of cash in his possession in accordance with the Executive Ethics Code. 7. Ramaphosa declared that he was not running any private business, nor did he declare that he continued to do cash transactions in American dollars inside South Africa without a requisite dealer license from the South African Reserve Bank. 8. Ramaphosa arranged for an illegal human trafficking of unlawful rendition of the direct victims from a foreign state. And as I've already indicated, he telephoned the head of that state, Namibia, President Gingo, and directly conspired with him to be able to carry out this illegal act. 9. Ramaphosa caused for the alleged theft of his American dollars to be classified as an intelligence and national security matter by the South African government, and thus expanding and abusing state security resources for unlawful ends. 10. Ramaphosa did not declare his American dollars to the South African Reserve Bank and had absolutely no authorization to obtain, accept, and transact in them, or to keep them at his farmhouse. 11. Ramaphosa corruptly involved South African police services in his scheme and acting thus conspiring against the state and direct victims. 12. Ramaphosa, by having a female farm worker held against her will at his farm and forcing a confession from her through torture, is guilty of gender-based violence, serious human rights deprivation, contravention of the Bill of Rights, and a slew of other laws. 13. Ramaphosa is guilty of human smuggling across the borders. This also occurred during the very strict COVID-19 shutdown, which did not allow for a cross-border movement, which means additional crimes. It means that President Ramaphosa, who so regularly through the family gatherings announced to us these strict lockdowns and insisted that every South African citizen must adhere to those, contravened these regulations and committed very serious crimes. It also indicates an astounding amount of cynicism about our laws and demanding from your fellow citizens to adhere to the law while you yourself flaunt it. And 14, international laws and other treaties were broken in the process of the American dollars cover-up scheme by Ramaphosa. Why did all of this happen?
So why did Ramaphosa feel to be under so much pressure that he had to cover up this farm burglary? During the hoarding of the American dollar's largest, ANC workers and their lives were laid in ruins without much care. They didn't receive salaries for many long months. In fact, there are some ANC workers, ANC employees, who in desperation, when they lost everything, when they lost their cars, their homes, when their families fall apart, committed suicide. They were suffering. While there's actionable evidence that part of the cash that was given to the African National Congress to alleviate this suffering of these members of the African National Congress, these employees, never reached the intended people, was never paid into the accounts of the African National Congress. Undeclared donations from overseas to assist the ANC, and specifically to assist these poor and long-suffering employees of the African National Congress, never reached their target. These monies were declared and smuggled and ended up undeclared by Ramaphosa, and it is our contention that some of these monies were stolen from the ANC itself and could very well be part of the hoard that was kept and eventually stolen by those thieves at his Palapala farm. There is an urgent need for an analysis of the serial numbers of the cash found in Namibia to assist in tracking and tracing the origin of the United States dollars in Palapala, and also to trace whether some of these dollars were not donations that were given in good faith by those who wanted to assist the African National Congress, but who were defrauded. Ramaphosa and some in his office, especially in the advisory section at the Union Buildings, have been since 2016 upwards to NASRAC in 2017, been conducting large-scale cash collections via private jets and military jets abroad from countries such as Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Equatorial Guinea, Somalia, Russia, and other countries. Part of this money found its way into bank accounts in South Africa and were used to pay those who worked in the CR17 campaign, and more specifically to bribe members of the African National Congress and delegates at the 54th National Conference of the ANC at NASREC to vote for Ramaphosa, and were part of the monies that contributed to him in contravention of the ANC's constitution and the constitution of our country to bribe his way into becoming the president of South Africa. These are very serious issues, and as we know, they continue to be covered up by the closing of the CR17 bank accounts. We're charged that the cash scheme of Ramaphosa involves top businesses and executives in South Africa, which is why the CR17 bank statements so desperately must remain a secret, even from the public protector and from the National Prosecuting Authority. We furthermore charge that South African foreign policy has been mortgaged repeatedly by Ramaphosa in exchange for cash. That the economic transformation of our country has been mortgaged for cash by Ramaphosa in exchange for cash and continued holdings he has in corporate South Africa, including banks, including the racist banks that we have, and in many of our mines, including the rogue mines of Glencore. We charge that all crimes with regards to MTN, Glencore, Lodman, etc. are accused of in various countries around the world relate also to the actions and conduct of Ramaphosa, and that Ramaphosa is directly a part thereof. We demand that all donations of the ANC made in cash and which is not declared must be declared. And as we've indicated, that those declared donations must be properly investigated, that the monies must be able to be traced to its source, and we must also make a careful analysis about whether some of those monies found itself to be under the mattresses and other furnitures of President Ramaphosa and his Palapala farm. We furthermore demand that the public protector suspension must be regarded as part of the whole crime and the defeating of the ends of justice by Cyril Ramaphosa. And surely, Cyril Ramaphosa is also in contravention of our labor relations legislation in that he caused for employment of foreign unskilled workers, as it came out of the wash now. Some of the people were working there on the Palapala farm, while there were well-suitable South Africans who could perform those jobs on the farm. Furthermore, we say that with the state security now located in Ramaphosa's office, we charge that renditions, torture, and the use of secret state funds, usually in cash, remain a danger to our democracy due to the high concentration of power into one man who has now been proved to be a rogue person carrying out serious criminal contraventions of our law. So these are all issues that need to be taken into consideration. When we follow a process of mobilizing in order to call for President Ramaphosa to face the full wrath of the law and to be held accountable. In the process of doing so, we call on every South African citizen to take serious our responsibility as citizens. Once we know that a crime has been committed, it is our duty to report that crime, to lay charges against the criminal or the criminals. Under those circumstances, we call on every citizen to bring the information that has now become public knowledge through the charges that Arthur Fraser brought against President Ramaphosa, and to go to the closest police station and also open charges themselves against President Ramaphosa. They can at least bring 14 charges, as we've already indicated, possibly more. We also call on every South African citizen to carry out their civil duty, and wherever they find or see President Ramaphosa in public places, whatever he does in his capacity as president, which he should no longer be, being charged with these serious crimes, they should carry out a civil arrest, arrest the man and take him directly to the closest police station to be charged and to be processed in terms of the law. There are proper provisions in our law for any citizen to do so, and any citizen who does so will be perfectly within his or her rights. We also urge the following actions: to tweet your support for the victims of President Ramaphosa, to use the following hashtags: hashtag Palapala victims, hashtag CR dollars, hashtag stand with the Palapala victims, hashtag reinstate the public protector, hashtag Cyril Ramaphosa must go. To call and to email all of your parliamentary and legislative representatives, the ANC leaders, specifically the national office bearers of the ANC and also the National Executive and National Working Committee of the ANC, and those in civil society, and ask them to take action, to express your outrage at the National Working Committee of the African National Congress for not having taken strong action, to not having called an emergency National Executive Committee meeting of the African National Congress to consider these very serious crimes that President Ramaphosa is being accused of. To sign online petitions and to take action to report knowing of these crimes at your nearest police station, as I've already indicated. To organize and to go on ground picketing action near the Palapala farm, which is the crime scene. To share with each other on social media and in whichever way you can, pictures of the crime, the snippets of videos that are available, and to use the hashtags that we have suggested or any other innovative hashtags that you as concerned citizens may want to develop. We also suggested the further actions. A march to demand that the public protector must be reinstated and that the deputy public protector in the meantime must take action in terms of the executive ethics code and report within a requisite time frame about what actions need to be taken to keep and hold President Ramaphosa accountable. To demand that Parliament enables the public protector to undertake this task without any interference by other parliamentary matters or allowing any interference by the President, who it is evident intends to defeat the ends of justice. To plan a march to the United States Embassy for action over the United States dollars usage inside South African politics. In terms of American law, the hoarding of such large amounts of United States dollars is illegal. And in fact, as the situation stands at the moment, President Ramaphosa should not be able to travel internationally and definitely not be able to travel to the United States of America without being arrested and charged. The known Bain capital and McKenzie malfeasances, including the sharing of Glencore findings with the National Prosecuting Authority, the Treasury and Public Prosecutor, in terms of the United States Global Magnitsky Act, is critical. We can also plan a march to the South African Reserve Bank and demand that they must take action. We must plan also to march on the Hawks and the South African Police Service headquarters and demand that action is taken. Similarly, we must march to the South African Revenue Services and demand to know what action they are taking in terms of getting Ramaphosa to pay tax for this huge amount of money in cash that he's been hoarding and which has evidently not been declared to the South African Revenue Services. All of this must take place in the context of using whatever resources we have to help us to organize. We urge you to use the content of this document to communicate messages wherever you are, on the internet or in person, in community meetings, at your local church, with neighbors and with fellow commuters. to take part in tweeting on Facebook, to send messages on TikTok, to support all along the world with the hashtags Stand with the Ramaphosa Farm Victims, hashtag Palapala Victims, hashtag CR Dollars, hashtag Ramaphosa Must Go. We must demand from the African National Congress that the National Executive Committee of the ANC must meet on an urgent basis immediately. And on the basis of these extraordinary serious charges that have been brought against President Ramaphosa, to immediately remove President Ramaphosa as President of the African National Congress and consequently also as President of South Africa. In addition, we must demand that the ANC must call a special emergency national congress to deal with these particular issues. There are also issues concerning our Electoral Act and the independent Electoral Commission that has to be addressed. All of these and many more that we may think about have to be activated as a matter of emergency. We are dealing here with a situation where our president has been exposed to be a criminal behaving in mafia-like style. If we allow this to continue, we put the rule of law, our constitutional democracy, and indeed the future of our country in serious risk. We must protect our democracy. We must take all these actions to assist to help to depoliticize the South African security agencies and the South African police service. We must demand all of these actions and more to set the truth free, to release our courts from the capture that they currently subjected to depoliticize our courts, and to save our country. This is a salient call to all the citizens of our country to mobilize, to act, and not to stop doing so until Cyril Ramaphosa and those around him who are indulging in this terrible flaunting of our South African law and constitution are removed and have to face the full wrath of the law. Aluta continua.
Thank you. That concludes the recording of the document and toolkit that we are distributing publicly. It is also, as I've indicated, on my Twitter account. It has been posted. It is also being distributed on Facebook and on various other social media platforms. All of us have to put now our money where our mouths are. Me having called on you to go to the police stations to lay charges against President Cyril Ramaphosa, have decided with a number of other comrades, many of them from Umkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association, to go tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock to the Rosebank police station. It is significant because that is also the police station where Comrade Arthur Fraser laid the charges against President Cyril Ramaphosa. And each one of us who will be part of that group will lay charges against President Cyril Ramaphosa in line with the charges that Arthur Fraser had brought and the charges that have been summarized in this toolkit document. My apologies for the long recording that you had to listen to, but I hope it is helpful. We refer you back to the written document for further references, and we thank you for participating in this Twitter Spaces conversation, and we invite all of you and many more to join us in the upcoming Twitter Spaces conversation with our public protector, Advocate Busisiwe Mkhubane, on the 15th of June at 7 o'clock that evening. Thank you and good night.